Chapter 441, Earthling's Grand Hybrid Plan. Ethan wasn't the sort to hide behind a keyboard, screaming slogans like "Obey me and thrive," "Defy me and perish," or parroting cruel catchphrases such as "Only dead Indians make good Indians." Even religious fanatics driven to extremes tend to act rather than rant online. So what exactly does it mean to rule? True leadership is people-centered, but not in the naive egalitarian sense of everyone being identical. Rather, it treats citizens as capital, assets whose talents and productivity generate value for the state. A ruler who thinks only in terms of "obey me and you'll prosper, defy me and you'll die" is nothing more than a tyrant, and a foolish one at that. A wise sovereign recognizes that every individual under his banner contributes to the commonwealth. That isn't to say betrayal should go unpunished. On the contrary, when dissidents actively conspire, whether in open revolt or secret cabals, they forfeit their place in society. In such cases, harsh measures are justified, up to and including the eradication of their line and the suppression of their culture. By distinguishing degrees of loyalty and threat, a ruler turns his people into a living, breathing engine of growth, one that works for him rather than against him. And that, Ethan knew, was the essence of true governance. Ethan stared at the data slate before him, already parsing in his mind the hard lessons of history. If a ruler rewards only those who obey and punishes everyone else, if he deems that good natives are the ones who've been broken and silenced, then he is no leader but a tyrant. True governance, Ethan reminded himself, is about extracting the greatest benefit for the least investment, not indulging in wanton cruelty. A despot may seize power, but he never secures a legacy, never truly advances civilization. In that respect, Ethan had found the perfect case study. In under 60 seconds, he'd absorbed the complete cultural archive of Earth as it exists in this Dragon Ball-tinged world. Granted, its history wasn't as tangled as our real Earth's, but it was still a tapestry of peoples, languages, and traditions. His solution was simple and ruthless in its efficiency: encourage genuine integration by granting preferential treatment to every culture under his rule. First, he would protect and promote their native languages and arts, recognizing that culture is the living memory of a people. Then, at the top of his agenda, he'd overhaul education. Schools would no longer be instruments of mere obedience, but the forge where loyalty and empire-minded values were shaped. Because ideas, once instilled in young minds, become the bedrock of allegiance. In time, those who called themselves citizens of the empire would do so not out of fear, but because they had been taught to believe in it. And in that belief lay Ethan's true power. Ethan's new education policy goes further than anyone dared before. Students from minority races start with bonus points on every exam. If those points aren't enough to pass, additional marks are added. If they pass, they can earn extra credit to move from third to second-class standing, and second-class students receive more points to reach first class. Maybe I'm being overly generous, but it doesn't stop there. We also award cash prizes and honorary titles to inspire these communities to embrace learning and participate fully in our schools. As part of the Empire's broader reforms, Ethan has made 10 years of schooling compulsory, not just for minorities, but for all citizens under imperial rule. The goal is clear. Education is the most powerful engine for integration and progress. Yet we must recognize a simple truth. Whether majority or minority, every race is ultimately just a social construct, an alliance of shared history, culture, language, even religion. These elements serve only as a means to define who belongs and who doesn't. If you accept the group's standards, you're one of us. If you don't, you're an outsider. That's why the easiest path to changing your national ID or marrying into and integrating with another culture is simply to embrace its defining norms. But how are those norms passed on? They aren't instincts, they're taught. From the moment a child is born, parents become the first teachers of identity, instilling the very standards that tell us what race we are, and by extension, who we can become. Ethan has lavished them with perks, most notably in education, practically making it free. Once they're drawn into his schools, they learn Ethan's version of history, speak the language he prescribes, and write in the script he approves. It won't take more than a generation or two before the next cohort is fully shaped. By then, their old ethnic identities will be all but erased. The official decree, protecting their culture? It was purely symbolic, a flourish to bolster Ethan's image as a benevolent ruler. To the outside world, it sounds noble. We respect every ethnic heritage, every culture enriches human civilization. In reality, people are pragmatic and often lazy. A handful will be naturally driven, but they're the exception. Who devotes time to learning what they don't need? Humanity's total body of knowledge is immense. Any given individual likely masters no more than 0.001% of it. No matter where they come from, everyone eventually has to fend for themselves. Once they reach adulthood and start hunting for work, they quickly discover a hard truth. The values they grew up with often clash with those of prospective employers. Would a hiring manager pass over a candidate who fits his own ideals just to honor someone's ancestral customs? Of course not, unless that person somehow meets every unspoken requirement and happens to be extremely good-looking. After all, in any corner of the world, appearances still count for everything. On the job, everyone must use the common language and script decreed by Emperor Ethan. Native tongues and dialects are effectively sidelined, their speakers branded as impractical or out of touch. Who would waste time studying a useless mother tongue, especially when it doesn't help you get ahead? Little surprise, then, that interest in preserving these old languages fades away. Even official edicts aimed at safeguarding traditional culture are met with polite indifference. Most people simply file them under pointless trivia. Still, brick by brick, Ethan's reforms began to reshape the empire. With each new policy and proclamation, the realm advanced, slowly but with unshakable determination. Ethan stood before his council in the marble-walled chamber, his voice steady and authoritative. We're only at the beginning of our grand experiment. The foundation of our empire is still being laid. The policies we enact now will become its bedrock. Once they're firmly in place, our realm will stand as immovable and enduring as Mount Tai. Even if I, God Emperor Ethan, were to vanish tomorrow, our structure would not collapse. Dr. Grow and his protégés will ensure continuity. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. True sovereignty rests on strength. The throne belongs to the one who commands the mightiest armies. Every decree I've issued, every law we draft, serves one purpose, to secure and perpetuate our rule. Force is the linchpin of stability. That is why every citizen we train in the martial arts, to forge better soldiers, more disciplined warriors, sharper minds. Ethan's gaze swept across the assembled faces. And let us not forget the power of heredity. Nature's principle is simple, survival of the fittest. It would be a contradiction for the descendants of the strong to emerge weak. Under our guidance, each new generation of Earth's people will grow stronger, smarter, more resilient. He crossed to a holographic projector glowing in the center of the room and tapped its surface. A three-dimensional model of a distant planet shimmered into view. I've been considering an ambitious expansion, integrating the Earth-born heroes of the Marvel Universe into our empire. Their origins are as varied as their abilities. One school of Thor, HT, claims they were created by the Celestials, which would explain the emergence of mutants and extraterrestrials among them. Another theory holds that Earth itself is the heart of eternity, its inhabitants literally the children of an endless cosmic force. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes alight. And in this current age of eternity, technology blossoms like never before. Artificial intelligences, nanomachines, bioengineered organisms. It's conceivable that in time, technology could rival or even surpass us. If we harness these marvels properly, they won't replace humanity, they'll elevate it. He raised his hand in a final sweeping gesture. The foundation is set. Our policies, our legions, our genetic programs, even the next frontier of alien and superpowered allies, all of it forms the pillars of an empire built to last. Mount Tai may tremble from earthquakes, but our dominion will endure. Furthermore, humans boast the highest mutation rate in the universe. Any mutated human hero or villain immediately becomes an extraordinary powerhouse, an anomaly the three empires scarcely ever encounter. In the comics, the Kree are obsessed with Earth's superpowered denizens, going so far as to abduct them for genetic study. Ethan had no way of knowing exactly how a hybrid of two humans would turn out, but one thing was certain. However the mutation expressed itself, the result would still be human. He even toyed with the idea of testing subjects from the One Punch Man world. There was no point in wasting time on the DC universe. In a creationist cosmos like this, only the divine could fully grasp the hidden mechanics driving human potential. Perhaps, by blending the right genes, they might finally engineer the ultimate superhuman. Chapter 442, The Saiyans Are Coming. When the Earth Empire's foundations were finally secure, Ethan stepped back into the DC universe. Before he departed, he'd positioned a clone to manage affairs in his absence, an essential precaution now that he commanded real power. Maintaining influence required more than charisma. It demanded contingency plans. He was surprised to discover that 2 years had slipped by. In that time, Superman Industries had exploded into the world's dominant corporate behemoth, truly the most powerful company in human history. Every policy, every strategic blueprint Ethan had crafted before leaving had paid off. Rising from the ashes of lesser enterprises, the superhuman tower complex now loomed over the American skyline like an unassailable fortress, dwarfing everything around it. The clone, Ethan's perfect double, had obeyed his instructions with ruthless efficiency. Anyone foolish enough to challenge Superman Industries simply disappeared, either silenced by the company's clandestine operatives or swallowed whole by engineered monsters. No trace remained to tell their story. Now, as Ethan observed the Teen Titans, his young protégés, struggling through the chaos of adolescence, he recognized the perfect moment to act. He'd waited for this opening. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and soon a new threat would arrive to test them all. The Saiyans were coming. If you think you have time to brood over the trials of adolescence, think again. In this world, you're too busy fighting monsters to worry about teenage angst. With humanity teetering on the brink of extinction, growing pains have become a luxury no one can afford. Yet a surprise arrived soon after Ethan's departure. Supergirl herself burst onto the scene. She registered for her debut, instantly made captain of the Super Pretty Girls, and was spotlighted by Superman Corp as one of the Big Three teams. The Big Three, the Fantastic Five, the Teen Titans, and the Super Pretty Girls, are the cream of the superhero world. Every other squad ranks in the second or third tier, with bottom-tier teams and lone operatives filling out the roster. From day one, the Super Pretty Girls were a sensation. Who doesn't love a team of gorgeous heroines? Even the female fans can't help but tune in. Meanwhile, the Teen Titans, once known for their straightforward heroism, have morphed into a hotbed of quarreling shipping. With the little bat adopting the mantle of Batgirl and Lex rebranding herself as Wisdom Girl, fans spend as much time debating and bickering over potential pairings as they do celebrating the team's caped exploits. This isn't manufactured hype, it's genuine rivalry, complete with rival camps at each convention and online forum. And so the age of monster slaying marches on, leaving no room for petty teenage heartbreak, unless that heartbreak comes from fandom drama. The official campaign to hype up shipping has kicked off, but the real fireworks come from the fans themselves. Among the Teen Titans' 4 guys and 2 girls, enthusiasts have already spun up more than 30 different pairings, and some have even dared to imagine scandalous 3-way romances. The studio's only fueling the fire by casually teasing the Titans' everyday interactions and then sitting back in silence. No denials, no clarifications, exactly as Ethan planned. Ethan knew better than anyone that shipping wars are the secret engine of fandom buzz. Let the fans attack each other. Let the debates rage on social media. Controversy drives traffic, and traffic drives popularity. The result has been explosive. Even the Fantastic Five and the Supergirls can't escape their own shipping factions and feuds. Fortunately, as living legends, the heroes themselves can always step in to keep the most deranged fans from crossing the line. Time to remind the world that they're not alone, Ethan mused with a smirk. He snapped his fingers, and above Washington, D.C., a blazing fireball blossomed out of thin air. As the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C.'s significance was undeniable. Ethan had deliberately avoided New York. This rare opportunity demanded the full weight of the federal government's attention. Unlike any other American city, Washington doesn't belong to a state. It's a special district governed directly by Congress. Its entire economy revolves around government affairs. The White House, the Capitol, All federal agencies and nearly every foreign embassy are housed here. On top of that, international institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Organization of American States maintain their headquarters within its boundaries, and the city is rich with museums and historic landmarks. By area, federal offices cover roughly half the district, defining what people commonly call the capital region. Then, boom, a thunderous explosion rocked the Black Palace. Inside, the President of the United States was thrown off balance. "What was that?" he shouted, eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't fathom the source of that blast and what it might mean. Had there been an earthquake in Washington? Nothing appeared on the seismographs. This was an explosion, plain and simple. In minutes, police cruisers and military vehicles converged on the blast site. A meteorite hit Washington? Why wasn't there any warning? Officers exchanged stunned looks. None of them had ever anticipated responding to a cosmic impact. They forced themselves to recall Academy protocols, securing the perimeter, evacuating civilians, even as years of donuts and coffee left them winded after only a few strides. Still, they moved quickly. Yellow tape snapped into place around the steaming crater. Curious onlookers were herded back. Everyone waited for orders when, suddenly, the pit shuddered. "What the hell?" whispered Officer Carter. Officer Adam King, cradling a cup of milk tea to stave off a sugar crash, set it aside and leaned over the edge. The crater yawned 30 feet across, its blackened walls jagged and still smoking. Whatever rock had plowed through the atmosphere had to be enormous, and it was far from done surprising them. The meteorite's surface cracked as the flames within suddenly winked out. In its place, a perfect white sphere rolled free of charred rock. Dirt streaked its smooth shell, but otherwise it looked nothing like any natural space rock the officers had ever seen. And now, that sphere was opening. Sergeant Adam King and his partner both froze. On the street beside them, Patrolman Diaz choked on his half-eaten donut and watched it plop to the asphalt. "Holy," he gasped. From the glowing hatch in the sphere climbed a man. Adam's pulse raced. "Is it an alien?" he stammered. Diaz's eyes narrowed. "He looks like one of us. Asian, maybe?" The newcomer pushed himself out of the sphere and landed lightly on 2 feet. He wore no uniform, just a simple gray jumpsuit that bore no insignia. His dark hair was slicked back, and his skin, pale but healthy, was untouched by the fire that still simmered around the crater's edges. He lifted his head, took in the stunned officers with calm, dark eyes, and for a moment no one breathed. Adam remembered the movies, Contact of the Third Kind, Independence Day, where first contact always ended in chaos, bullets, and bodies. But here stood a single man, unarmed and unflinching, as if he belonged more to this world than the meteorite ever could. The hush stretched on, broken only by the low crackle of cooling debris. Adam squared his shoulders and cleared his throat. "I'm Sergeant Adam King. This is Patrolman Diaz. What's your name?" The man tilted his head, a faint smile brushing his lips. "I'm Ethan." And with that one word, everything changed. There are 3 recognized levels of UFO contact. 1, Type 1, the craft leaves no trace, no sounds, no heat, no physical disturbance. 2, Type 2, the UFO's presence alters its surroundings in a measurable way, scorch marks on the ground, burned foliage, melted soil, and the like. 3, Type 3, witnesses actually see alien beings aboard the craft, sometimes even making direct contact with them. Chapter 443, Grand Scene. "Hello, please don't be alarmed. We come in peace from Earth," Adamkin blurted out, stepping forward with hands raised. After more than 2 years of enduring all manner of bizarre creatures and monsters, he and the others had grown surprisingly open-minded. These newcomers, even if they looked oddly human, weren't the strangest thing they'd seen. Raditz paid him no mind. With a disdainful snort, he lifted himself out of the pit. His scouter beeped twice in quick succession. "Pathetic," he muttered under his breath. "Power level, 5. He swept his gaze over the ruined cityscape. "What's the meaning of this?" he growled. "Why are there still people living freely on Earth? Where is that brat Kakarot when you need him?" Raditz's eyes narrowed at the intact buildings. According to Cyan protocol, Kakarot should have hunted every last human into hiding, yet here they were, living above ground, unafraid. Clearly, the boy had failed at even this simple task. With a powerful beat of his wings, Raditz ascended into the sky, determined to find Kakarot himself. The sight of him rising overhead sent Adamkin and his companions scrambling for cover. They knew there was no hope of standing up to such a warrior. Within moments, they melted into the shadows, praying to remain unseen. They had to notify the Black Chapter Department immediately. The U.S. government had been compelled to create this new agency to handle both powered humans and monsters, officially known as the Black Chapter Department. Armed with a distinctive black seal and backed by presidential authority, it outranked the country's 3 major intelligence services, including the notoriously aggressive FCN. It could requisition any federal resource at will. Congress had approved a $10 billion slush fund, and countless wealthy industrialists had contributed even more to get it off the ground. From the moment the Black Chapter Department opened its doors, experts everywhere went cold at the thought of its unchecked potential. Ambitious careerists couldn't stop scheming over the opportunities it would bring. After all, unlike private outfits such as the Superman Company, this was a state-sanctioned powerhouse. Anyone with insight could see how terrifyingly vast its influence would grow if it weren't restrained, and there were virtually no safeguards to hold it back. No modern government, regardless of country, ought to harbor a secret super agency above its defense ministry. Yet here it was, the Black Label Division, operating fully outside any ordinary power structure. Once the division received word of an otherworldly intruder, it moved at once to alert Superman Inc. where Ethan, a fresh recruit in the Black Label Division, stared in disbelief at the encrypted dispatch. The nation's Ministry of National Defense had deliberately concealed the recent airliner crash, leaving no official trail to trace or survivors to save. Only now did the division's true reach come into focus. No earthly office, not even defense, could override the Black Label's authority. In fact, the Black Label Division outranked every conventional agency. Even the Pentagon's ministers could do nothing to intercept its operations. America's first instinct had been to silence the incident, to lock down news of extraterrestrial activity and keep other nations in the dark. But the Black Label knew that containment alone wouldn't be enough. Within hours, it had mobilized Superman Inc.'s roster of heroes and special ops teams. Their mission: establish first contact with the aliens and secure whatever intelligence they brought. As Ethan geared up for deployment, he realized this was only the beginning of a war no one had seen coming. Meanwhile, Raditz prowled the skies of Earth, scouring for any trace of his younger brother, Kakarot. His scouter's display was buzzing with readings far above what he'd ever expected from that lowly Saiyan. Could Kakarot really be dead? He muttered in disbelief. The scouter's data convinced him it was possible. Kakarot's base power level had an explan, EDID 50. True, he could briefly break into the low hundreds when transformed into a great ape, but without warning, most opponents who hovered above 50 could defeat him in an instant. Raditz shook his head. What a waste. If he's truly gone, I'll clean up the mess here first, and then I'll deal with the rest of this planet at my leisure. He hardened his expression as he gazed down at the gathering of humans below. They were strong by Earth's standards, but utterly insignificant compared to a Saiyan warrior. With a flick of his wrist, Raditz unleashed a crackling ki blast, ready to wipe them out in one swift strike. After all, his brother was likely dead. Why delay the inevitable? In the original story, Raditz had mistaken Piccolo for Sun Wukong and merely investigated before losing interest or scaring him away. Today, however, believing Kakarot already defeated, Raditz had no intention of holding back. Any remnant of resistance on this world would be crushed without mercy. As soon as Ethan unleashed the Qigong wave, Adam, Jin, and the others were obliterated before they even had a chance to flee. The shockwave that rippled outward struck like a 2,000-pound bomb, powerful enough to level entire city blocks. Even if someone remains standing hundreds of meters away, the force can shatter internal organs without a single outward bruise. There's a documented case of a man thrown clear by a remote blast. He staggered to his feet, convinced he'd escaped serious harm, only to collapse and die later from unseen internal hemorrhaging. Real life doesn't bend to movie magic. A body that looks intact on the surface may be irreparably torn apart inside by a violent shockwave. Ethan's attack erupted in the heart of Washington, right where reporters and curious onlookers had gathered. Hundreds of people were killed instantly by the blast. Thousands more were wounded, trampled, or driven into panic. The streets filled with blood-curdling screams as chaos and devastation spread through the capital. Ethan's world shattered in an instant. One moment he was crossing the National Mall on his way to cover a routine press briefing, camera slung over his shoulder, earbuds in place, and the next, a shockwave toppled him face first onto the plaza. The air lit up with a blinding flash, and the ground beneath him convulsed like it might split open. When he staggered to his feet, the monument he'd been heading toward was hidden behind a rising wall of dust and flame. All around him, people screamed for help. A woman's voice rang out above the chaos. "Help me! Please! Help my husband!" Another man, clutching his side, fell to his knees and cried, "My daughter! Somebody! Get her out of the car!" Terror and confusion rippled through the panicked crowd as debris rained down. Someone trampled over Ethan's foot. He barely registered the pain through the adrenaline. Guttural shouts of "Alien attack! Alien attack!" cascaded down Pennsylvania Avenue until it felt like the entire city was trembling in fear. Ethan forced himself to keep moving. He helped a dazed tourist to her feet, then sprinted past overturned news vans and half-melted street lamps. Every second brought new horrors, people writhing on the pavement, blood soaking the concrete, distant sirens blaring as emergency units sped past. Ethan fumbled for his phone, dialed his editor, but all he managed to croak out was, "It's big, enemy, mass casualties," before the line went dead. Meanwhile, inside the White House Situation Room, the mood was grim but decisive. The president, eyes bloodshot from fatigue, sat flanked by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the nation's top cabinet officials. On the monitor before them, live footage showed Washington in flames, crowds pouring into the streets in terror. No one argued or hesitated. In unanimous agreement, they classified the event as an extraterrestrial assault. The commander-in-chief issued a single order: maximum defensive posture. By presidential directive, the Capitol went onto the highest state of alert. All civilian-owned weapons within the District of Columbia were immediately requisitioned. From overseas battlefields, the 3rd Infantry Division received a recall order: every soldier to board transport within the hour. One by one, 120 tactical missile battalions sprang to readiness. The nation's greatest assets were mobilizing, but for millions of Americans, caught in the epicenter of this unknown onslaught, this was only the beginning of a long, terrifying fight for survival. Ethan ducked into the shadow of a crumbling marble pillar, chest heaving, camera still in his hand. He steadied his breath and raised the lens once more. If there was one thing he knew how to do, it was bear witness. And right now, the world had to see what was happening in its own capital. The Department of Defense had been sealed off by thousands of National Guard troops, and the military now controlled every approach to the capital's headquarters. A citywide curfew was in effect. All public transportation had been suspended. The press was under strict gag order, and martial law ruled the streets. Evacuations unfolded in chaos. Hundreds of thousands were ordered out of their homes, while others found themselves trapped behind roadblocks. Small groups slipped through cordons, racing to safety before the alien threat could overwhelm them. Washington, D.C. teetered on the brink of collapse. Inside the Emergency Operations Center, General Harrington paced before a wall of monitors, his jaw clenched. "What are you waiting for?" he shouted at his staff. "Aliens have broken our perimeter. Every second wasted costs lives." He reached for the secure hotline. "Black Chapter," he barked into the receiver. "Status report." A tense voice crackled back. "All right, sir. We're mobilizing every available unit. Federal Reserves, the Special Response Teams, even the superheroes. We'll hit the aliens hard and fast." "Good," Harrington replied. "Contain the threat, and under no circumstances let word of this reach the international press. We go dark until we've reclaimed the city." Chapter 444. Fierce Radits. The highest levels of the U.S. government moved into action at once. Within minutes, the newly formed Black Chapter Task Force and the Department of Defense had declared a state of emergency. Every available resource was mobilized to confront the unexpected threat. Fighter jets scrambled into the air, armored divisions rumbled into position, and infantry units braced for combat. What had begun as routine preparedness swiftly turned into full-scale war footing. As soon as the battle commenced, Raditz revealed the true extent of his power and speed. Squadrons of American F-22s and F-35s launched coordinated bombing runs, unleashing wave after wave of missiles and high-explosive ordnance. But Raditz simply weaved through their assault with inhuman agility. His ki flared, and with a single blast he sent one jet after another spiraling out of control. Explosions blossomed across the skies above Washington, painting the horizon with fire and debris. On the ground, M1 Abrams tanks rumbled forward, their 120mm cannons churning out shell after shell. Artillery batteries joined in, unleashing thunderous barrages. Yet none of it seemed to faze Raditz. He strode through the crossfire as though he were walking in a light rain. Every missile that streaked toward him dissolved in a brilliant flash the moment he met it with a pulse of pure energy. The city's defenses, once thought impregnable, faltered before his might. In the command bunker beneath the Pentagon, generals watched in stunned silence as their screens filled with images of their forces being obliterated. They had prepared for countless scenarios, but nothing on this scale, and nothing like Raditz. Now, as Washington's skies burned and its ground forces reeled, they began to realize the true meaning of this crisis. They were up against a warrior who defied every conventional weapon ever devised, and the battle had only just begun. Ethan hovered above the battlefield, unperturbed as tank shells detonated around him in thunderous bursts. He simply smiled, untouched by the explosions. Even the nearby naval fleet joined the assault, unleashing a barrage of artillery fire, but each shell disintegrated the moment it neared him, as if repelled by an invisible barrier. With a casual flick of his wrist, Ethan unleashed a shockwave of raw energy. The ships trembled under its force, their systems grinding to a halt in an instant. Panic rippled through the American command. They'd poured every available cutting-edge weapon and tactic into this confrontation, yet not a single one had scratched him. Radios crackled with frantic orders and disbelief. "He's unstoppable," one officer gasped. "Our weapons, upgraded for the biggest monsters and threats on Earth, can't even faze him." "Damn it," another snarled, voice cracking with frustration. "We've tested these munitions on the toughest alien creatures in the galaxy. How is he stronger than all of them?" Above the chaos, Ethan rose higher, gathering incandescent energy at his fingertips. Then he unleashed it without warning. Waves of searing force cascaded down onto the city, obliterating skyscrapers, bridges, streets, and vehicles in moments. Concrete cracked, steel twisted, and in an instant the metropolis was engulfed in roaring flames and shattered glass. Below, the terrified populace fled in every direction, caught in a torrent of smoke and debris. Sirens wailed, but even the deafening alarms did little to slow the devastation. In Ethan's wake, the city burned, its skyline reduced to embers and ruin, a testament to the futility of conventional arms against this otherworldly force. Ethan sprinted through the crumbling streets as the city around him collapsed into chaos. Office towers and apartment blocks lay in ruins, their shattered windows spilling glass and concrete across the sidewalks. There was nowhere left to hide, no subway station untouched, no basement still standing. Every corner he turned revealed another catastrophe. The U.S. military had taken devastating losses under Raditz's relentless assault. Hundreds of soldiers and special operations teams had been killed or grievously wounded in the opening strikes. Forced to fall back, commanders scrambled to revise their tactics and redeploy their remaining forces. They knew that conventional methods would never stop an enemy like Raditz. Defeating him would demand a bold, unprecedented strategy. From high above, the commander-in-chief watched his capital burn. Aboard Air Force One, the president faced the grim reality that Washington could not be saved. His only hope was containment, preventing Raditz from escaping and wreaking havoc on other cities. He issued orders to throw every available unit between the enemy and the city limits and poured reinforcements and firepower into the battle zone. Meanwhile, Raditz showed no sign of slowing. He hovered above the skyline, unleashing crackling energy waves that leveled skyscrapers, snapped bridges in two, and shattered critical infrastructure. Explosions ripped through neighborhoods, sending pillars of flame into the sky. Plumes of smoke choked the streets and panicked civilians. Families clutching their children fled into the wreckage, desperate for any shelter that still stood. Even the ground forces, reorganized but outmatched, found themselves under a ferocious barrage they could neither predict nor withstand. The city was a war zone, and Raditz reigned supreme. Ethan tore through the U.S. military defenses like a force of nature. A single sweep of his arm sent rippling shockwaves that detonated tank shells inside their turrets, leveling armored carriers in a cascading explosion of steel and fire. When he summoned cyclonic vortices, they flipped half-tracks end over end, hurling soldiers like rag dolls across the scorched earth. Those who tried to fight back with rifles or anti-tank missiles found their weapons useless. Bullets shattered on an invisible barrier surrounding his body, and every missile fizzled out the instant it made contact. Under Ethan's relentless assault, frontline units crumbled. Commanders issued frantic orders to fall back and regroup, but he was already among their ranks again, phasing through rubble and debris with inhuman speed. Reinforcements arrived only to be met by a searing beam of energy that carved through rows of infantry, sending survivors fleeing in utter panic. Once the field forces were broken, Ethan set his sights on Washington, D.C. In moments, the White House lay in ruins, its iconic facade reduced to splintered stone and collapsed columns. He turned next on the Capitol, shattering its dome with a pulse of raw energy that echoed like thunder through the shattered streets. Government agencies ground to a halt as officials scattered into secret bunkers, powerless to stop the devastation unfolding above them. All around, the city descended into chaos. Civilians begged for escape routes, while sirens wailed over the roar of collapsing buildings. Even as the military unleashed its toughest countermeasures, barrages of missiles, non-stop artillery salvos, each strike appeared harmless against Ethan. Missiles exploded against him, only to dissipate harmlessly in midair. Artillery shells simply dimmed against his aura. And then, as abruptly as he'd arrived, Ethan vanished over the horizon, leaving Washington in smoldering ruin. The nation was left leaderless and humiliated, its capital a silent testament to the unstoppable power of the man they once knew as Luthor. Raditz needed only a casual flick of his wrist to scatter the incoming fire. Dense artillery barrages and missile salvos alike exploded harmlessly against his defenses. With Washington still standing, he simply turned away, unharmed and unconcerned, and soared westward. His next target was Chicago, the so-called Windy City. High above the skyline, Raditz gathered energy in his palms and unleashed a devastating shockwave. Steel and glass skyscrapers crumpled like paper, entire blocks of shops and apartments vanished in a roar of collapsing concrete. Beneath the thunderous blasts, terrified citizens screamed and scrambled for cover, only to be swallowed by smoke and fire. Within minutes, Chicago lay in ruins, inert husks of once proud buildings, smoldering rubble lining streets that had known laughter and life until moments before. Unperturbed, Raditz pressed on to Los Angeles, a city renowned for Hollywood dreams and sunlit boulevards. From his vantage above the palm-lined streets, he let rip another series of energy pulses. Movie studios, grand theaters, and bustling entertainment districts were engulfed in an instant inferno. Flames licked the sky as debris rained down, sending survivors into a desperate, futile scramble for safety. The whole city shivered under a pall of terror and despair. Everywhere he went, Raditz left behind nothing but ashes and echoes of horror. Across two of America's greatest cities, prosperity and promise were reduced to the same thing: wreckage. And still he flew on, utterly unstoppable. Ethan watched in stunned silence as Raditz swept across the East Coast. First came New York City, the city that never sleeps, where searing energy waves laid waste to Times Square's bright lights, reduced Fifth Avenue's luxury storefronts to rubble, and turned Central Park into a twisted wasteland of scorched trees and shattered paths. Sirens blared nonstop. Screams echoed through crumbling streets as frightened New Yorkers fled, many stumbling over debris or trapped beneath fallen beams. Without pausing, Raditz soared onward to Philadelphia, then Houston, and finally Boston. Each metropolis fell into pandemonium. Highways buckled, skyscrapers cracked, and terrified citizens poured into the streets, desperate for any safe haven. From Washington, D.C., the president declared a nationwide state of emergency, ordering every available unit, military, National Guard, first responders, to stop this onslaught. But against Raditz's prodigious power and unmatched ferocity, humanity's defenses seemed futile. Damn, a Pentagon analyst muttered over a crackling radio feed. This Raditz moves faster and hits harder than the one in Marvel. Ethan clenched his fists. He'd known Raditz was dangerous, but he never imagined such monumental destruction. Now, he had to find a way to stop him before the entire country fell. Chapter 445, Nuclear Blast. A superhero eradicated in an instant. The Fantastic Five and the Teen Titans tore through the clouds above Washington, D.C., expecting fierce resistance, but nothing had prepared them for the utter devastation below. As they broke through the storm cover, they saw the skyline reduced to smoking shells. Entire battalions of the U.S. military had been obliterated in moments. Tank columns, fighter squadrons, and entire regiments simply vanished under a cataclysmic blast. Standing amid the wreckage was the Saiyan Raditz, his armor scorched but unbowed. He hovered above a crater so vast it swallowed the Pentagon grounds. When American defense forces scrambled fighter jets and launched every missile in the arsenal, Raditz had moved faster than sound, outrunning radar, sidestepping nukes, letting them detonate harmlessly behind him. Within instants, nuclear firestorms tore through downtown blocks and incinerated a detachment of the Guardians United, heroes once hailed as the nation's first line of metahuman defense. From his vantage point on the Washington Monument, Raditz surveyed the annihilation below with a disdainful grin. "Is this the best your planet can muster?" he taunted, voice carrying on the wind. "Such pitiful weapons." On the ground, Wonder Titan, leader of the Titans, staggered to her feet amid fallen comrades. Her costume was ripped and smoldering, but her eyes burned with resolve. At her side stood Steel Shield of the Fantastic Five, his metal plating dented from explosions that would have pulverized an ordinary hero. He ground his jaw. "We can't keep charging in blind," he panted. "He outclasses every conventional and every superhuman we've got." Across the country, the Pentagon's war room was chaos incarnate. Under red alert, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and civilian leaders crammed around a massive holotable displaying live feeds of the destruction. The Secretary of Defense, face grim beneath harsh fluorescent lights, spoke first. 200 military units lost, dozens of our top-tier metahumans down, and still no dent in his armor. Nukes are ineffective. Interceptors can't lock on. We've never faced anything like this. General Hayes, his uniform immaculate despite the emergency, tapped a finger on the table. "We need a new playbook. Our existing strategies are useless. He doesn't just outfly us, he outthinks us too." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the newest member of this crisis council, Ethan. Once known only by his street name, Luther, Ethan had risen from orphaned kid to one of the world's foremost experts in alien biology and advanced energy weapons. His cybernetic left eye, a prototype combining Terran and extraterrestrial tech, glowed faintly in the dim light. "Secretary General," Ethan began, his voice steady, "I've been analyzing the battle data. Raditz's energy signature reveals a vulnerability, microscopic fluctuations in his power output when he redirects a blast. It's subtle, but if we can generate a feedback pulse precisely tuned to that frequency, we might be able to overload his system." He activated a new hologram, diagrams of a hybrid coil array, a plan to combine Kryptonian crystal amplifiers with our most advanced particle emitters. "Deploy this field around a delivery vessel, manned or unmanned, and we stand a real chance. It's untested on this scale, but it's the only path forward." Murmurs rippled around the table. The stakes had never been higher. Behind them, the war room doors remained wide open to the smoking horizon beyond. America's greatest champions were down, the capital lay in ruin, and an unstoppable alien warrior loomed overhead. But as the leaders absorbed Ethan's proposal, hope took root. They had no choice but to gamble on a desperate plan, and Marcus Logan, Chief of Staff, finally nodded. "Time is against us," he declared. "Let's get it done." Outside, Raditz's laughter echoed over the shattered city, but inside the Pentagon, a new strategy was already taking shape. Humanity refused to kneel. The true counterattack was just beginning. Ethan sat in the Pentagon's high-tech war room, eyes fixed on a wall of monitors streaming live feeds from across the globe. As the military's liaison to the Teen Titans and the Fantastic Five, he knew in his gut that conventional forces alone couldn't stop Raditz. That's why he'd secured prototype energy dampers, experimental power armor, and autonomous reconnaissance drones. and funneled every scrap of actionable intelligence directly to the heroes. At a top-secret research facility outside Denver, Dr. Hammond's team worked around the clock. Geneticists, energy specialists, and combat theorists dissected Raditz's cyan physiology down to the last cell. They charted his key signature, modeled his muscular response under stress, even ran virtual simulations of his signature moves, anything to reveal the tiniest weakness they could exploit. Meanwhile, high above the shattered skyline of Metropolis, Raditz hovered in his scuffed battle armor, hair bristling with contempt. Through commandeered military transmitters, his voice boomed across every channel. "So, you humans and your so-called super teams think you're the strongest warriors on this planet? Gather if you must, just don't expect to survive. I'll clean you up one by one." On the big screen, Wonder Woman, Diana Prince, cocked her head. "Clean us up?" A junior officer tapped a tablet beside Ethan. "Say in slang, he means he'll eliminate us all, systematically." Diana tightened her grip on her sword, its Amazonian steel glinting. "Then let him try. I am Diana of Themyscira, protector of Earth. We will not bow to an invader." Raditz's laugh crackled through the speakers. "Invader? I am Raditz, champion of the Saiyan race, the unrivaled warriors of the universe. This planet either surrenders or it falls." Ethan exchanged a determined glance with the Teen Titans field commander. Around them, heroes and soldiers alike steeled themselves. The battle for Earth was only just beginning. "Struggle all you like. Your resistance only entertains me." Cyan Raditz snarled and hurled himself at the Fantastic Five with terrifying force. In an instant, he closed the gap, intent on ending the fight in a single devastating strike. Black Bat reacted first. His high-tech battlesuit flared to life as he twisted aside, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts from his gauntlets. Raditz dodged the beams, but with lightning speed, his prehensile tail lashed out. It wound around Black Bat, spun him like a top, and flung him into the air. Mid-flight, the suit tore apart, and the hero's body disintegrated into floating fragments. The Deep-Sea King roared, calling on the might of the ocean's leviathans. Scales sprouted over his flesh. Massive fins erupted from his back and arms until he loomed like a living blue whale. "Blue whale," he howled, every muscle rippling with newfound power. Ethan and the others braced themselves as the transformed hero charged forward, but Raditz barely moved. With a single earth-shattering punch, he struck Deep-Sea King's skull. The blow echoed like a bursting balloon. Scales shattered, fins collapsed, and the Deep-Sea King crumpled to the ground in a lifeless heap. "Black Bat! Deep-Sea King!" Ethan screamed, racing to their side. His heart pounded, a knot of dread tightening in his chest. They'd faced mutant warlords, alien invasions, rogue machines. Nothing had ever gone so horribly wrong. Yet here, in mere seconds, two of their closest comrades had fallen. Raditz hovered above the fallen heroes, arms crossed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. Silence draped the battlefield like a shroud. Ethan clenched his fists, eyes burning with grief and rage. Someone had to stop this monster. It looked as though that someone would have to be him. Raditz was a nightmare made flesh. He'd already razed dozens of American cities and showed power unlike anything the world had ever seen. Ordinary heroes like Black Bat or Deep-Sea King wouldn't have lasted a second against him. If they'd survived at all, it would have been nothing short of a miracle. "Snap out of it!" Someone shouted, trying to rally the stunned onlookers. Ironbone leapt forward, copying cutting-edge armaments on the spot and unleashing a barrage of high-tech firepower. Raider poured out a massive electrical discharge, but even his crackling bolts barely left a mark on Raditz's Saiyan defenses. At the same time, the Teen Titans charged in. Superboy, Homelander, and Soldier Boy hurled their full strength at the invader, each strike shaking the ground. Supergirl soared into the battle too, her speed and might on full display as she launched a flurry of blows that would have flattened any ordinary opponent. Above it all, the U.S. military provided vital support. Fighter jets screamed overhead, releasing air-to-surface missiles. Tanks and armored columns pounded Raditz with every shell they had, and coordinated tactical strikes tried to chip away at his power. Yet despite missiles, energy blasts, and unmatched superhuman force, Raditz stood unbowed, his Saiyan resilience weathering every assault. Chapter 7. The Alien Warrior. Amid the chaos of shattered buildings and twisted steel, Ethan stood alone against the onslaught of the Fantastic Five, the Teen Titans, and the American military. His dark hair fluttered in the dust-filled wind, his green eyes cool and unflinching. From every direction, volleys of missiles, energy blasts, and superpowered assaults converged on him, yet he did not falter. A voice crackled over a military radio. "What kind of monster is this?" A Teen Titan hovering overhead cried out, "Are all aliens this powerful?" On the ground, one of the Fantastic Five muttered, "He said he's a Saiyan, supposedly the strongest warrior race in the universe." "That means we're up against the most powerful creature in existence?" Another Titan gasped. Ethan absorbed every strike with uncanny ease. A barrage of high-tech cannon fire struck his body like water droplets against steel. Energy blasts from Starfire and Robin's electrified Eskrima sticks glanced off his super-dense muscles. Even when Cyborg's sonic cannon hit him squarely in the chest, Ethan barely staggered. Then, in a heartbeat, he counterattacked. A single punch shattered an armored Humvee. A backhand blow sent Captain Atom crashing through a concrete wall. Wherever Ethan landed a blow, it was a one-hit knockout. In the thick of it, Captain America raced forward, shield raised. He met Ethan blow for blow, trading lightning-fast strikes and parries. Though Ethan's raw power outclassed every hero on the field, Steve Rogers' courage and unbreakable will allowed him to adapt. Each time Ethan surged forward, Captain America found a way to weather the storm, ducking beneath an energy wave, rolling out of the path of a devastating kick. Still, with each passing second, Ethan's true might became clearer. No matter how many heroes teamed up, no matter what new weapon the military deployed, he remained unbowed, an alien force beyond measure. And as the sun dipped behind the ruined skyscrapers, both sides braced for the next inevitable clash. Raditz's true power became terrifyingly clear as the battle wore on. He cupped his hands, gathering raw chi, then unleashed wave after wave of crushing energy. Each Qigong blast bore the force to reshape the landscape, toppling mountains as casually as scattering debris. Standing before those surges, the assembled heroes felt a weight unlike any they'd known. Even their own extraordinary abilities seemed insignificant against a strike that rivaled a tactical nuclear blast. The shockwaves ripped across the battlefield, shattering nearby towns and reducing buildings to rubble. Yet the heroes refused to falter. Pooling their strengths, they formed makeshift shields of force and light, struggling to blunt Raditz's relentless assaults. All the while, they searched desperately for the slightest opening to turn the tide. Captain America, steeled by courage and unyielding perseverance, charged headlong into the fray, determined to close the distance and bring the fight into close quarters. Chapter 446. Mastering the Battlefield. Doomsday Approaches. Raditz stood atop a scorched ridge, surveying the weary coalition forces below with a contemptuous curl to his lips. Their uniforms were torn, their capes ragged, and their faces drawn with exhaustion. He let out a low, mocking laugh. "You Earthlings really are pathetic," he sneered. "Your precious superpowers and so-called combat skills are nothing more than party tricks compared to my strength." His words bit into the heroes like poisoned needles. They had thrown everything they had at him, combining strategy, teamwork, and raw power, but each attack had been repelled with brutal ease. It was clear, Raditz's might dwarfed theirs. Wonder Woman planted her feet firmly on the ground, shield raised. Her eyes blazed with defiance. "You'll regret underestimating an Amazon warrior," she declared, voice ringing across the battlefield. "We will defeat you, Raditz." Raditz merely shrugged, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Defeat me?" he echoed. "I didn't come here for a child's game. I came to conquer your planet." Superman, Clark Kent, struggled to steady his breathing. His suit was scorched, one fist clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Don't get too cocky," he growled. "Every enemy has a weakness. We'll find yours, and we will bring you down." Raditz let out a harsh laugh that crackled like static. He shook his head, eyes narrowing. "Weakness? You really believe I have one?" He spread his arms as if to embrace the world. "I am Saiyan royalty. I have no weaknesses." A heavy silence fell. The coalition forces exchanged worried glances, but none stepped forward. Raditz's confidence was as imposing as his power, and for the first time, even the bravest among them felt doubt creep in. Above them, dark clouds swirled into an ominous vortex. Nature itself seemed to sense the breaking point. The battlefield trembled. winds howled. It was as though the planet were bracing for the end. And as Raditz turned away with a smirk, the heroes realized the real fight was only beginning, and doomsday was drawing near faster than they dared imagine. Captain America planted his feet, bracing himself against Raditz's fierce onslaught. "No matter how hard you hit, you won't break me," he declared, voice steady. "We won't give up. We'll find a way to beat you." Raditz swung again. Steve Rogers brought his shield up just in time. The impact rang out like a thunderclap, but he didn't falter. Relying on his superhuman strength and expert combat training, he darted in and out of his opponent's reach, blocking brutal blows and answering with precise counterstrikes. High overhead, Clark, codenamed Supernova, and Kara Zor-El Supergirl took to the sky. From that vantage, they rained blows down on Raditz, hoping to overwhelm him with aerial attacks. "Supernova, watch out," Kara shouted. Her warning came a heartbeat too late. Raditz gathered his energy and unleashed a devastating key wave. It struck Clark squarely, sending him tumbling out of control. He plummeted toward the ground like a meteor. "Clark!" Kara cried as she dove after him. She caught him inches from impact, breaking his fall, but the blast had shattered his biological force field, the very mechanism that lets him fly. His steel-hard body absorbed most of the damage, but without that force field, he was powerless to stay aloft. Clark lay on the earth, chest heaving, as Kara knelt beside him. Above them, Captain America pressed his shield against Raditz's next assault, determination blazing in his eyes. The battle was far from over. Ethan hovered beside Wonder Woman Diana, wings of golden energy shimmering at his back, while Supergirl Kara darted in from the side. Before them stood Raditz, his Saiyan armor gleaming under the afternoon sun. With a roar, he unleashed a torrent of ki that slammed into Diana's polished bronze shield. Sparks flew as the divine barrier held firm. Diana seized her moment. Bracing one foot on the cracked pavement, she drove her Vulcan sword forward in a blazing arc. Ethan followed, up, channeling his psionic force into a series of focused strikes, and Kara unleashed a searing heat vision. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the combined assault might force Raditz to yield, but the Saiyan staggered only briefly. He grinned, knuckles crackling with energy, then tossed each of them aside as though they were rag dolls. Ethan and the others hit the ground hard. Breathing heavily, they scrambled back to their feet, eyes wide. He's unstoppable." Supergirl gasped, dusting sparks from her cape. Diana's face was set in grim lines. "We've never faced power like this," she admitted. "If this is just his vanguard, what hope do we have?" All across America, the news was breaking. An alien warrior had easily dispatched 3 of the world's greatest heroes. Cities shuttered their businesses, schools closed, and millions filled the streets. Panic rippled through social media and talk shows alike. "Why are these aliens here?" People cried. "Exploration? Plunder? Conquest? Can our government or our military ever be ready for this? Are our heroes even up to the task?" Rumors swirled faster than emergency alerts. Some believed the invaders sought Earth's resources. Others suspected a silent observation, a gauntlet thrown down to gauge humanity's strength. But no one had answers. And as night fell, an uneasy question weighed on every mind. Were the defenders of Earth already outmatched? Rumors were spreading like wildfire. With the U.S. government maintaining an unsettling silence and imposing a strict information blackout, people began to wonder, was something being hidden? Or was Washington simply unprepared to face an alien threat? In living rooms and diners across the country, citizens whispered their fears. "Can our superheroes really fend off invaders?" they asked one another. Others questioned whether the military, even aided by extraordinary heroes, could mobilize quickly enough to protect them. As anxiety mounted, the airwaves filled with scaremongering reports. A late-night broadcast blared urgent news. Reliable intelligence confirms that aliens have already seized control of multiple cities. Officials are quietly evacuating residents under the cover of darkness. Panic set in. Store shelves were stripped bare as people rushed to hoard food, water, and fuel. Families packed their cars, convinced they needed to flee before the next attack. Then came the most devastating rumor of all. A member of the Fantastic Five was killed in battle yesterday, and now the team may be broken. Hope gave way to despair. If even Earth's greatest champions could be struck down, what chance did ordinary citizens have? Across the nation, fear took hold. Every siren wail, every unexplained power failure only deepened the sense that humanity was running out of time and running out of saviors. Ethan stared in disbelief as the television anchor delivered the grim bulletin. Scientists now warn that the alien invaders may deploy unknown technologies against us, technology we simply cannot defend against. Panic rippled through the city. Neighbors barricaded themselves at home, stocking up on supplies and experimenting with homemade defenses. Conspiracy theories proliferated overnight. Did you hear? The government's secretly negotiating with the aliens, maybe even betraying our country. At first, officials tried to suppress these stories, which only fueled the rumors further. People wondered if their leaders were sacrificing ordinary citizens for some dubious deal. Desperation ran so high that many swore they'd accept any arrangement, even if it reduced them to subservience, so long as the aliens spared them. Through flickering screens, the world bore witness to the aliens' overwhelming power. In a remote demonstration, a single wave of alien energy, like a concentrated pulse of qigong, struck its target with catastrophic force. The blast erupted in a blinding explosion that shook the ground as though the planet itself trembled. A towering shockwave roared outward, toppling buildings, ripping up streets, and ending everything in its path. Screams tore through the air as terrified citizens ran in every direction, desperate to flee the devastation. And everywhere Ethan looked, he saw the same question in people's eyes. How could any human hope to stand against an enemy this unstoppable? Reddit's Qigong waves did more than topple mountains. They could literally rewrite the world's surface. By fine-tuning the intensity and range of his energy bursts, he could raise plains into towering peaks or drain whole seas and fill them with earth. Such raw, terrifying power sent every member of the coalition force into a desperate fight for survival. The battlefield became a twisted landscape of shattered rock and churning seas as Raditz unleashed wave after wave of energy. Each blast rippled out in an instant, too vast, too swift, and too devastating to dodge. Even heroes of legendary strength faltered before him. Superboy Clark and Supergirl Kara threw themselves into the fray, but their speed and heat vision proved futile. Captain America's shield shattered under the onslaught, and Wonder Woman Diana could only deflect so much before her bracelets heated to glowing white. From a safe vantage point, Ethan watched it all unfold, arms folded across his chest. He frowned, the firelight from Raditz's last explosion dancing across his features. He's still sloppy, Ethan said quietly to himself. In this state, Raditz is nothing more than a trainee. He shook his head, and yet he's untouchable. Chapter 447, Raditz shows his cool side. Ethan watched in stunned silence as Raditz, who'd been soundly defeated back in the Marvel universe, laid waste to every hero in the DC world. He shook his head. That pancake-faced guy can't be this strong. Not even Thor or Hulk could stand up to him. So how is he winning? He spared a glance for Homelander and Soldier Boy, both lying face down and feigning death to avoid another blast. They weren't fools. They knew better than to challenge Raditz directly. Soldier Boy's most powerful chest cannon might level a building, but Raditz had just obliterated half the city with a single key wave, and already he'd laid waste to a third of the country. At that level of power, anyone volunteering for a one-man sacrifice to save America would have to be insane. And even if they tried, could their best attacks ever hope to stop a key wave like his? Even Homelander, once entirely fearless, trembled at the sight. Raditz stood there like a god descended from the heavens, his sheer presence enough to shatter anyone's courage. This was brute strength, crushing superior numbers, plain and simple. As they say back in the Great Crab Kingdom, Raditz hasn't just broken his enemies' resolve, he's awakened a demon in their hearts. Ethan's jaw clenched as a dark storm raged inside him. If he couldn't exorcise the demon in his heart, he would never rise again from this battlefield. Watching his hesitation, the brilliant strategist Lux and the young Batgirl Bruce held back instead of charging forward. A mind like his, Lux whispered, shouldn't be thrown away here. We need to find another way to deal with the Saiyans. Bruce's wings trembled at the memory of Raditz's savage lesson. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her gear. Could a mere mortal truly match the strength of powerful aliens like him? With no time to spare, the fight surged back to life in a blaze of motion. Shadows of fists and feet wove through the air as both sides struck in rapid succession. Each collision froze the world for an instant, then exploded outward in rolling shockwaves, rippling, shattering, sending the temperature soaring. On one flank, Captain America hurled his shield with unerring precision. On another, Wonder Woman's lasso crackled like lightning. Above them, Superboy and Supergirl streaked through the sky, landing blow after blow in a blur of speed. Yet Raditz stood unshaken, his stance as immovable as a mountain. Ethan shook off his doubt. The fate of the battle, and perhaps the entire world, depended on his next move. He would have to conquer the darkness within if he wanted any chance of victory. Raditz's roar split the sky like a thunderclap. In an instant, a searing wave of energy blasted outward from his form, scorching the air, tearing trees from the earth, and obliterating nearby buildings. Supergirl didn't hesitate. She hurtled forward, fists crackling with radiant power, and met the shockwave head-on. Upon impact, the very atmosphere shook. Stones skittered across the ground, distant trees were uprooted and tossed skyward, and an invisible shockwave rippled in all directions. Wonder Woman sprang to her side, raising her gleaming shield. As the energy slammed into the polished surface, it exploded in a dazzling flare, ringing with a deafening clang that held the blast at bay. Behind them, Captain America and Superboy charged in, unleashing a relentless barrage of strikes aimed straight at Raditz's core. Blow after blow they pressed, each attack more ferocious than the last, as though they intended to drive him to his knees. All around the battlefield, other heroes joined the fray. Their combined assault thundered against Raditz's defenses, a cacophony of power and will, determined to bring down the Saiyan warlord once and for all. "You're too slow. This level isn't even challenging." Raditz laughed, eyes glinting. "Pathetic punches. I could stand still, and you still couldn't land a hit." Before Captain America could react, Raditz's hand shot out, his fingers snapping shut on Steve's fist, like a steel trap. Steve grunted as brute force locked his arm in place. "Well, you've got the numbers. Why all the hesitation?" Raditz taunted, driving a sharp kick into Steve's abdomen. Bent double, Captain America gasped for air as Raditz pressed his advantage. In a fight this fierce, every move counts. Yet Raditz remained calm, his body twisting sinuously like a serpent. One moment he ghosted behind Captain America's shield, the next he reappeared in front of Superboy, catching him off guard. Superboy and Supergirl hurled a barrage of punches in perfect tandem, trying to overwhelm him. But Raditz wove through their attacks with dancer-like grace. He vaulted into the air, rolled on the wind, and evaded their most powerful blows as if they were slow-motion echoes. Unfazed and still in control, Raditz landed lightly on the ground, ready to strike again. Raditz moved with effortless grace and unshakable confidence, as if the battle were already won. When Wonder Woman lifted her shield to block his blow, his strength became impossible to deny. He clamped onto her arm and wrenched it mercilessly. Diana's lips parted in a sharp gasp of pain, but Raditz only laughed. "You're far too weak," he jeered. Despite the agony, Wonder Woman refused to yield. She countered with a flurry of shield strikes, each one driven by pure determination to break free of his grip. Her eyes burned with resolve, untouched by Raditz's taunts. Beside her, Captain America hurled himself into the fray, his shield smashing into Raditz's defenses with all his might. Yet time and again, Raditz simply sidestepped or deflected their attacks, as though they were mere annoyances. "Is this the best you Earthlings can do?" he mocked, voice dripping with scorn. Still, the heroes held their ground. They had faced powerful foes before, and though Raditz's power dwarfed theirs, they believed in their cause, and in each other. Gritting their teeth, they launched themselves back into the attack, determined not to let his cruelty go unanswered. The onslaught only grew fiercer, but Raditz stayed cool and collected. He weaved through each attack with fluid grace, countering relentlessly, every strike brimming with both power and precision, forcing the other heroes to dig deep just to block or evade. The battle had dragged on for what felt like an eternity, yet neither side showed any intention of backing down. Fists and boots collided in a relentless cadence, the air crackling with raw energy as heat and shockwaves pulsed outward. Then, in a sudden motion, Captain America drove a punishing punch into Raditz's gut. For a heartbeat, Raditz staggered, but he regained his posture in an instant, a slow smile curling at his lips. Not bad, he drawled, voice low and teasing. You still pack a punch. Chapter 448, A Famous Showdown. Ethan stepped forward, ready to strike, but halted the instant he saw Captain America's shield nearly clip Raditz's jaw. The thought of making a grand entrance to save the world, of dazzling everyone with his power, flickered through his mind. Yet watching Raditz stagger under each blow held its own appeal. And since Raditz didn't seem truly desperate, Ethan's own intervention felt less urgent. He could always wait for Vegeta and Nappa to arrive, if needed. Captain America, however, wasn't about to yield. Surprised by Raditz's earlier remark, he gathered his courage, gripped his shield tighter, and launched into a more ferocious assault. Each swing of the shield sliced through the air with a roar, causing the very atmosphere to tremble. Gusts whipped up dust and debris, whipping around Raditz like a warning sign. Raditz narrowed his eyes. He'd always respected Captain America's skill, but this display caught him off guard. His power seemed to spike with every strike, as if the man in the star-spangled uniform were tapping into some hidden reserve. Why is this Earthling growing stronger by the second? Raditz muttered, frowning in disbelief. He refused to back down. With a fierce grunt, Raditz charged straight through Captain America's barrage, intent on ending the fight once and for all. Raditz moved like a bolt of lightning, weaving through Captain America's assaults, one moment at his left, the next slipping in at his right. His speed and power forced Cap onto the defensive, but the hero refused to back down. Summoning his superpower, courage, he steadied his breathing and hunted for the smallest opening in Raditz's relentless offense. His gaze was unshakable, his spirit undaunted, and every counterstrike rang with determination. Dust billowed around them, and with each clash of fist on fist or boot on shin, the very earth beneath their feet trembled. Raditz's blows carried the force to fell an ordinary warrior. Even joined by Wonder Woman and Superman, Captain America felt their combined might waver before such ferocity. Then, in an instant, Raditz's fist met Cap's shield with a deafening crack. The sled-like disc shattered, shards spraying outward in a cascading shower of metal. The battlefield froze at the sight. A flicker of loss and sorrow passed through Captain America's eyes. His shield had always stood for his courage and resolve, and now it lay in splinters before him. Ethan stared down at the splintered fragments of his shield scattered across the battlefield. A wave of anguish washed over him. This shield had been more than just armor. It was his symbol, his companion, the very bulwark of his convictions. Its destruction felt like a harbinger of his own defeat. Yet as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Ethan squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and fixed his gaze on Raditz. "Your strength is impressive," he called out, voice ringing with unyielding resolve. "But my will is stronger. You may shatter a shield, but you will never break the power of justice." Drawing in a steadying breath, Ethan steeled himself for the counterattack. A fierce determination glinted in his eyes, and he felt his resolve crystallize into something almost tangible. Raditz sneered, crossing his arms. "You really think you can withstand me?" Ethan's reply was calm but absolute. "No, I can't stop you outright, but justice will endure, and so will I." With a dismissive chuckle, Raditz lunged forward and drove a brutal punch into Ethan's abdomen. Pain exploded through Ethan's torso, forcing him to double over, but he didn't go down. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself upright, meeting Raditz's gaze with unwavering courage. "My body may be vulnerable," he panted, voice hoarse yet resolute, "but my spirit is unbreakable." Then, with a rallying cry, Ethan launched himself at Raditz, pouring every ounce of strength into his attack and into the conviction that, no matter what, justice would prevail. Raditz snarled, "Spare me your speeches about justice and indomitable will." With a roar, he urged forward. His power had swelled inexplicably, so much that even he was taken aback. "What's going on with this Earthling?" he muttered under his breath. On the ground lay Superboy and Wonder Woman, unconscious. Only Captain America remained standing. Raditz's lips curled into a cruel grin as he closed the distance and swung a fist at the Sentinel of Liberty. "Think your body can take this?" Cap barely had time to brace himself. Raditz's blow cracked against his jaw, and pain exploded through him. Before he could recover, a brutal sidekick smashed into his ribs, forcing him to his knees. "You're strong," Raditz taunted, "but not strong enough." He followed with a crushing punch to Captain America's back, sending him flying several meters. Captain America hit the ground hard, every bone in his body screaming. Still, he refused to give in. He forced himself up, chest heaving, eyes blazing with defiance. "You can't break me, Raditz." With that, he charged again. Raditz simply leapt up and met him with a thunderous kick that sent Cap spinning through the air. Moments later, Captain America crashed back to Earth, skidding to a stop in a spray of dust. As silence fell over the battlefield, Raditz let out a slow, satisfied laugh. But in the battered hero's resolute glare, the Saiyan sensed this fight was far from over. Ethan fought to his feet, glaring up at Raditz. "You really think you can beat me like this?" Raditz laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "I'll admit, you've got spirit, but it still won't be enough." Ignoring the taunt, Ethan inhaled deeply and summoned every last ounce of strength for one final assault. He charged, throwing a solid punch at Raditz's chest. The Saiyan merely shrugged off the blow, then drove a savage knee into Ethan's midsection. The wind whooshed from Ethan's lungs, but he forced himself to stay upright. Gathering himself, he unleashed a powerful uppercut aimed at Raditz's ribs. Raditz caught Ethan's fist in midair and, with a casual twist, flung him skyward as though he weighed nothing. Ethan arced through the air and crashed to the ground yards away, pain flaring across his body. "Clark," Ethan shouted, knowing Superman's ally couldn't swoop in fast enough. The Man of Steel was rising, but his bioforce field had only just regenerated, slowing his acceleration. Raditz's cold eyes followed them both. "Pathetic insects," he spat. "A duo that can't even fall in line. Why won't you just die?" Impatience flared in Raditz's expression. He would eradicate these nuisances once and for all. Raditz sneered and thrust out his palm. In an instant, a sphere of condensed qigong coalesced into a blazing beam of raw power, aimed straight at Superman and Captain America. The burst of energy cut through the dark sky like a streak of lightning, its searing heat instantly vaporizing the surrounding air and unleashing a deafening roar and a high-pitched whistle. As the wave surged forward, it warped the atmosphere into a massive vortex, rattling trees, shuddering buildings, and cracking the earth as if the planet itself were recoiling in terror. When the qigong blast struck, it detonated on impact with Superman and Captain America, unleashing an enormous shock wave that seemed to tear a jagged rent through the sky. Nearby structures disintegrated into dust, while chunks of concrete and twisted steel were hurled upward, only to slam back down in a devastating storm of debris. Chapter 449, Raditz, the Earthling Cheats. A blistering heat wave tore through the battlefield. Trees ripped free from their roots, and leaves crumbled into ash before they even hit the ground. Superman's eyes widened in terror. He tried to flee, but some unseen force held him fast. Ahead of him, a rippling wall of qigong energy surged forth, crackling like a ravenous beast, its jagged edge aimed straight at him. Just as the onrushing wave was about to crash into Superman, Captain America burst into view. With no hesitation, Steve Rogers hurled his indestructible shield into the path of the attack. The impact was thunderous. The shield splintered instantly, disintegrating under the relentless pressure. Unprotected, Steve lunged forward and wrapped himself around Superman, using his own body as a living barrier. "No! Steve!" Superman's roar tore through the air. He reached out, but it was too late. The qigong wave slammed into Captain America with merciless force. In an explosion of blinding light, Steve Rogers was vaporized on the spot, his final act one of pure, unyielding courage. Superman stood frozen, the taste of loss choking him, as the swirling heat and ash settled around him. The ultimate sacrifice had been made, and only the battle's raging flames remained to witness it. Captain America's sacrifice had not been in vain. Though the qigong wave struck him full force, he managed to absorb enough of its energy to shield Superman from total annihilation. Superman still bore the brunt of that colossal blast, flesh and blood sprayed through the air, bones protruding beneath shredded skin. He tumbled helplessly, agony racking him with every impact. His uniform was torn and soaked in his own blood. From the wreckage, Raditz sneered at the sight of Superman's suffering. "Lucky you can't die, isn't it? But look at you now, hardly better off than a corpse." Silencing the taunt, Superman summoned every scrap of strength and hauled himself upright. His eyes burned with a relentless fire, as sharp and unyielding as blades. He charged Raditz in a single, furious motion, every ounce of his fury, grief, and Captain America's courage driving his strike. Raditz merely smirked and met him with a returning punch. The two fists collided in midair with a thunderous crack, shockwaves rippling outward. And then, in that split second of sheer force, Superman's fist shattered, bones splintering into bloody fragments. But Superman didn't flinch. He still believed Captain America's spirit lived on in him. "Not quite," Ethan muttered, watching Superman's inner thoughts flicker across his mind. The yellow sun hung overhead, its rays streaming down to fuel Superman's cells, absorbing energy, then releasing it to mend the hero's shattered body. In an instant, Raditz and Superman hurled their fists forward. It was like two meteors colliding, a thunderous shockwave rippling through the sky. Superman's hand shattered under the impact, as if struck by a cosmic hammer. Pain exploded through his arm, a brutal force wrenching him backward. Raditz sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "Still weak, kid. You've got a long way to go." His power seemed endless. Each of Raditz's strikes came like a whirlwind, hammering at Superman until the Man of Steel could do nothing but endure. "Ha-ha! Is that it? Pathetic!" Raditz crowed, launching a rapid series of blows, boom, 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 each hit echoing like cannon fire. Superman spun helplessly through the air. Raditz's cruel grin widened. In one fluid motion, he drew back his fist and kicked Superman like a football, sending him hurtling away. Ethan was blasted clear across the battlefield, as though struck by a thunderbolt. His body tumbled through the air, each twist and roll sending fresh waves of agony through him, his chest, back, and head absorbing blow after merciless blow, as if hammered by a sledge. Raditz darted around him in a blur, every leap ending with a savage kick that left Ethan reeling. It was like being kicked back and forth as casually as a football. "How did I get so weak?" Ethan raged still, ently, pain and frustration roiling in his veins. He fought to move, but his limbs felt shackled by invisible iron chains. All he could do was watch Raditz weave through the air, striking with unrelenting ferocity. Ethan's body spun aimlessly, blood pounding in his ears, his vision swimming at the edges of blackness. Despair and pain coiled around his throat, making each breath a battle. Just when the darkness threatened to claim him, a searing red light flared before his eyes. It blazed like molten fire, tearing through the gloom and splitting the sky apart. Raditz's foot, mid-kick, slammed against the radiant barrier and was driven back. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, his onslaught faltered. Suspended in that brief stillness, Ethan's battered form hovered behind the incandescent wall, finally, a moment's reprieve from the storm of blows. Ethan seized the moment, twisting his body mid-air to face Raditz. His fists clenched as he focused every ounce of strength into a single point. He let loose a feral roar that made his entire frame tremble. Confronted by Raditz's overwhelming power and fueled by his own indomitable will, Ethan felt his very cells begin to change. They pulsed with raw energy, absorbing more, growing stronger, and yearning to unleash everything at once. With a thunderous crack, his fist met Raditz's. The collision sent ripples through the air, and for an instant their forms blurred together in a storm of force. Then Raditz countered, driving Ethan back with a brutal uppercut that sent him crashing into the side of a building. The wall buckled beneath the impact, and Ethan slumped to the pavement, every breath a searing reminder of his injuries. As pain hammered through him, Ethan refused to yield. He shut his eyes and reached deep within, drawing on the sun's radiance as his life source. A brilliant wave of power flared across his body, each cell buzzing at an impossibly high frequency. Cuts and bruises knotted shut, a fiery core of untapped potential stirred to life. When he opened his eyes again, everything had changed. His muscles felt denser, his senses sharper. Strength and speed surged through him in newfound measure, and a determined smile curved his lips. Raditz would soon learn that powering up wasn't the exclusive gift of legends. Ethan was ready to prove it. Ethan's eyes snapped open to find Raditz striding toward him, a cruel smirk on the Saiyan's face. "Still got some fight left in you, huh?" Raditz taunted. Without replying, Ethan drew in a steady breath and pushed himself to his feet. In an instant, a searing crimson aura burst from his body, rippling outward in shockwaves of raw power. Raditz staggered back, astonishment widening his eyes. What kind of energy is that?" His scouter's readout spiked wildly, the numbers climbing faster than anything he'd ever seen. Then, as if fueled by the sun itself, a brilliant golden-red light ignited in Ethan's chest. It spread in waves, bathing him in a warm, radiant glow. Every cell in his body seemed to hum with fierce intensity, the mingling hues of crimson and gold painting the battlefield in awe-inspiring brilliance. Even Raditz, ever ruthless, felt a flicker of respect and a surge of wariness at the sight of such overwhelming power. Chapter 450, I'll beat you to death! Ethan shot into the sky, arms raised high as fiery energy roared across his body. His eyes burned brighter than twin suns, threatening to set the world ablaze. The air around him instantly vaporized under the intense heat, leaving a hollow void in its wake. From below, Raditz stiffened, trembling as he felt that overwhelming power press in on him. Then, without warning, Ethan's eyes unleashed twin beams of scorching light, like two dragons of flame twisting upward into the heavens. The scorching arcs writhed and pulsed in midair, radiating such unbearable heat that the ground beneath seemed to quake. "Justice and peace! We will never bow to evil!" Ethan bellowed, his voice ringing with iron resolve. Flames danced in his gaze as raw strength surged through him. He had never felt so powerful. This was the solar flare, Superman's cutting-edge New 52 ability. By channeling the solar energy stored in his cells into a single, tremendous burst, Ethan could unleash a city-shaking explosion in the blink of an eye. And now, Raditz was about to be its first target. Ethan braced himself, feeling the familiar surge of power flood his veins. In his Superboy form, his strength soared to unimaginable heights. But he knew that, after a few days, his abilities would vanish entirely, leaving him drained and powerless. Other transformations traded that temporary blackout for a massive energy burst, essentially turning the user into a living bomb. But today's fight demanded raw, straightforward strength. "This is the power of justice," Ethan shouted, stepping into the fierce sunlight to face his opponent. Raditz answered with a roar, and the two collided in a cataclysmic clash. Raditz's fists rent the sky. His kicks split the earth itself. He moved so fast that only blurred after-images betrayed his position. Every ki blast he launched exploded like a nuclear detonation, sending scorching shockwaves rippling outward. In seconds, a mountain peak disintegrated into ash, and a nearby city crumbled under his relentless assault. Ethan didn't flinch. He unleashed twin beams of heat vision that struck Raditz's ki waves head-on, producing thunderous booms and igniting the surrounding air. Then, drawing on his super strength, he darted through the debris, hammering Raditz with bone-crunching punches that forced him backward. Each strike shook the ground beneath them, each collision of energy warping the very air. They traded blow for blow in a spectacle of raw power, Ethan's steadfast resolve against Raditz's overwhelming ferocity, determined to see whose justice would prevail. Ethan and Raditz's clash rocked the very foundations of the world. Mountains split, oceans churned, and forests trembled as if the earth itself were tearing apart. Fissures yawned in the ground, and the sky burned with raw, fiery energy, threatening to ignite everything below. Then, in a blink, Ethan erupted like a thunderbolt, hurling himself from stillness into blinding velocity. Time itself seemed to freeze. One moment he was poised, the next he reappeared beside Raditz, driving his knee down in a devastating strike. The air shredded as if cleaved by an invisible blade, opening a jagged rift around them. Ethan's blow crashed into Raditz's arm with a thunderous crack. Raditz howled in agony, his senses exploding with pain as he was swept off his feet and flung backward like driftwood on a tsunami. Darkness edged his vision, every nerve screaming, yet the force carried him on, tumbling him ever upward. When his battered mind finally cleared, he realized with shock that he'd been hurled beyond the atmosphere. Below him lay the tiny curve of Earth, vast and distant in the silent void. Ethan fought to steady himself as his body shot upward, but the force carried him too quickly. In an instant, Superboy loomed above him. Cupping his fists, Superboy unleashed a devastating punch. The impact drove an overwhelming shock through Ethan's body, and his vision went black. The world collapsed inward as he plummeted like a stone, helplessly watching Jay the ground rush up to meet him. Just before he would have hit the earth, Ethan summoned every last bit of strength and braced himself, coming to a staggered, half-kneeling stop in midair. Still, the sheer momentum slammed him into the ground with earth-shaking force, carving out a massive crater. Sand and dust exploded skyward, blotting out the sun and clouding everything in a choking haze. Before the dust could settle, Superboy was already there again, his eyes blazing, an aura crackling with barely contained power. In a blur of motion, he raised his leg and delivered a thunderous kick to Ethan. It was over in the blink of an eye, far too fast to follow. The air itself seemed to compress with a thunderous roar as Ethan slammed his fist into the ground. A blinding shockwave rippled outward from his feet, ripping through trees and blasting the mountainside to jagged ruin. Raditz's heart lurched. He'd never encountered a power like this. He dove aside, feet skidding over shattered rock, but Ethan's speed was inhuman. Before Raditz could even brace himself, Ethan's fist connected with his chest and sent him flying on a brutal arc through the sky. He slammed into a distant peak, agony exploding through every bone in his body. For a long, disorienting moment he lay there, pain coursing through him like white-hot fire. Then, with sheer will, he forced himself to his feet. Blood trickled from his lips as he forced his eyes skyward. Ethan hovered above, expressionless, as if the entire world obeyed his command. He folded his arms and spoke with icy calm. "You're strong, Cyan, but I'm stronger. You'll pay for Steve with your life." Raditz's anger burned hotter than his pain. He growled, fists clenching, unwilling to be bested by this Earth boy. Every fiber of his being trembled with fury and resolve. He would rise again and make Ethan regret this day. Arrogant fool. I'm a Saiyan warrior from the universe's strongest fighting nation. How could I possibly lose to you, an Earthling? Raditz drew in a steady breath, summoning every ounce of strength for one last stand. He pressed his palms together, gathering a swirling surge of energy, then rocketed toward Ethan. The speed of his charge was blinding. A crackling aura trailed him like an after-image as it bore down on its target. Ethan didn't flinch. He narrowed his eyes, centered his ki, and molded it into a blazing crimson fist. With a roar, he met Raditz head-on. Their powers collided in midair with a thunderous boom that shook the land. Mountains trembled and rocks tumbled from their peaks as a searing shockwave radiated outward, obliterating everything in its path. In a heartbeat, Ethan's form blurred. He vanished and reappeared behind Raditz so swiftly only a fading silhouette betrayed his movement. With the world itself seeming to tear apart beneath him, Ethan leapt into the sky and drove his charged fist into Raditz's chest like a thunderbolt. Raditz had no time to dodge. All he could do was grit his teeth and absorb the impact as the force of Ethan's blow threatened to rip him apart. Ethan summoned every ounce of his strength to withstand Superboy's assault. Chapter 451, Death of Raditz. Ethan's power was overwhelming. With a single bone-shattering strike, he sent Raditz hurtling through the air in a high arc. Raditz crashed into a mountain peak, gouging out a massive crater as rocks and dust exploded skyward. His body lay buried in the shattered stone, motionless, as if he'd become a twisted statue. Without hesitating, Ethan charged, his aura flaring like molten sunlight. He drew his fist back, then hurled it down with all his might. The impact unleashed a roaring shockwave that rattled the very air. Jagged peaks crumbled under the blast, and the surrounding desert sands were swept away in a turbulent gale. Under that relentless pressure, Raditz managed only a few desperate gasps. His limbs quivered as he struggled, rage and humiliation contorting his features. But the energy wave was inescapable. With a final tremor, he collapsed, the fire in his eyes snuffed out. When the dust settled, silence reigned over the wasteland. Raditz lay still in the crater, defeated, broken, and dead. In that eerie calm, it was clear the fierce Saiyan warrior's life had come to an end. Ethan ground his teeth. His scouter lay shattered, the tiny display flickering out forever. Even without the numbers, he could feel it. Superboy's power now dwarfed his own. If only he'd had time to reconstruct the moon, he might have turned the tide. But he'd been careless, and at this moment, his energy reserves were all but depleted. Above him, Superboy's eyes ignited with a fierce, inner fire. He drew in a long, steady breath, and the air around him began to shimmer. An unseen current of ki wound itself about his form, distorting time and drawing the world's attention to him. That invisible force gathered speed, whipping the atmosphere into a crackling storm centered on the young hero. Then, With a sudden, explosive exhale, Superboy thrust his fist forward. Ethan watched in horror as the punch cleaved the sky itself, the shockwave issuing a deafening roar. The surrounding air compressed into an imperceptible barrier, channeling the full force of the blow into a single, devastating strike. Ethan's heart pounded. He felt that punch in his bones, the raw, annihilating power behind it, and he knew instantly that there was no counter left in him. As the earth trembled beneath his feet, dread settled in his chest. He could not withstand this final, unstoppable assault. Raditz tried desperately to evade, but Superboy's speed was simply unmatched. In a blink, Superboy and his fist blurred into a single beam of light, brilliant as the midday sun, hurtling toward Raditz with terrifying power and velocity. The beam tore clean through Raditz's body, enveloping him in searing radiance. The unleashed energy obliterated everything nearby. Desert sands were blasted skyward, distant mountain ranges quaked, and the air crackled with sparks and electrical arcs, as if a cataclysmic thunderstorm had erupted. Raditz's agonized scream rang out as his form collapsed under the assault. In the explosion's wake, he dissolved into blinding light, leaving only a wisp of smoke drifting into the sky. Superboy descended slowly, touching down on the scorched earth. News of their clash would send shockwaves around the globe, devastating countless American cities and echoing far into the Mojave Desert. Ethan hovered over the devastation below. Wherever the Saiyan energy wave had passed, the sky seemed to cave in, the earth cracked, and whole mountain ranges shattered. Rivers were rerouted as if the landscape itself had been torn apart. Ethan reported quietly, "Raditz is dead. No last words, no declaration of any ongoing Saiyan invasion. It's all gone." He shook his head. "Still," he added, "once Vegeta and the others arrive, nobody on Earth will be ignorant of who and what a Saiyan is. Raditz's destruction will serve as a warning all on its own." A grim satisfaction crossed his face. The battle had left the United States reeling, entire cities reduced to rubble, thousands of lives snatched away in an instant. In the Oval Office, the President sat behind her desk, a damage report clutched in trembling hands. Her face was ashen, her eyes haunted by the scale of the catastrophe. If a disaster this immense occurred under her watch, even one as unthinkable as a Saiyan attack, her presidency would be over. "We have to act now," she said, voice tight with urgency. "If we don't, the consequences will be truly disastrous." "Yes, Madam President," her advisor replied, stepping forward. "We're still assessing the full extent of the damage and drafting our rebuilding plan," he continued. "But we're going to need significantly more resources to manage a crisis of this magnitude." The president closed her eyes and rubbed her temples, fatigued by the enormity of the task ahead. Ethan leaned forward in his chair, meeting the president's gaze. "I know, sir. I'm pulling every string I can to secure international support, but we also have to shore up our own defenses, make sure this never happens again." President America tapped a folder on the desk. "Good. We've already raised the national threat level and deployed patrol units coast to coast." Ethan nodded. "We've also recovered one of the Saiyan vessels. Our engineers are dissecting their propulsion systems as we speak. If we can reverse engineer even a fraction of their technology, it could turn the tide in our favor." The president sighed with relief. "Keep pushing on all fronts and get a clear message out to the public. We need calm, not panic, while we figure this out." Across the globe, governments and news outlets tracked every twist and turn of the conflict. At a United Nations press briefing, the Secretary General warned, "This battle has shown us beyond doubt that extraterrestrial threats are real. Now more than ever, we must unite, sharing intelligence, resources, and research to protect our planet." Leading networks ran around-the-clock coverage of the skirmishes in orbit and on Earth's surface. Citizens in major cities grew anxious as headlines flashed warnings of possible raids. Meanwhile, research labs from Tokyo to Toronto raced to decode alien weaponry and study Saiyan combat physiology. If humanity hoped to survive the next attack, understanding the invaders' strengths and weaknesses would be crucial. Despite the fear and unease gripping the world, some voices were already asking harder questions. "This battle has exposed just how vast the gap is between us and the alien invaders," they warned. "If we're to stand any chance in the next fight, we must rethink our values and the very ways we survive." High above the smoking ruins, Ethan hovered, his cape billowing in the rising heat. The battlefield below was a testament to his power, yet every victory had come at a terrible cost. With each alien he crushed, a little more of his own humanity slipped away. He knew that, grim as it was, this ruthlessness might be the only thing standing between humankind and extinction. "Well done, Ethan." The calm voice came from behind. Ethan's heart lurched. "Brother?" He spun around, and in that instant he remembered everything. He had a brother, far stronger than he was. Why had Raditz stayed on the sidelines today? If he'd fought alongside Ethan, maybe Steve would still be alive. But summoning Raditz to battle had always felt too risky. What if the galaxy claimed them both? A wave of weakness washed over Ethan. Legs trembling, he sank to one knee, haunted by the question he'd never dared to ask, and terrified of the answer. Chapter 452, Quarrel. Clark lay on the ground, utterly drained. His superpowers vanished, leaving him in a state of crippling weakness. Nearby, Ethan knelt, studying Clark's faint vital signs. Despite the collapse, he could see Clark's cells regenerating at a remarkable rate. That gave him hope. Ethan retrieved a compact solar regulator from his kit, an advanced device capable of emulating and amplifying the yellow sun spectrum. With careful precision, he calibrated its settings and bathed Clark in concentrated sunlight. Within moments, Clark's color returned, and his strength began to rebuild. Around them, Superman Incorporated's rapid response team worked frantically, coordinating medical aid and securing the perimeter. Elsewhere on the battlefield, other heroes had joined the fight. Steve Rogers, the man the world knew as Captain America, had faced Raditz toe-to-toe. Ethan had chosen not to intervene, respecting Steve's leadership and believing in his chances. In the end, Steve's stand delayed the enemy long enough to save countless lives, but it cost him everything. His sacrifice was both tragic and, in its own way, heroic. The scene shifted on every screen around them to a live broadcast from the Capitol steps. President America stood before a formation of troops and a gathering of world leaders. He raised a hand, letting the hush settle over the crowd before speaking. "Today, we mourn the loss of a true hero, Captain Steve Rogers. His sacrifice bought us the precious time we needed to turn back the Saiyan invasion. Though he is gone, his spirit will forever live on in our hearts." He paused, sweeping his gaze across the assembly. "Let us honor his memory by standing united, by carrying forward the courage he showed in our darkest hour." As the president fell silent, the weight of his words hung in the air, a solemn reminder of the cost of their victory, and the resolve they would need for the trials still to come. Let us never forget that without Superboy and the other heroes, we could never have stood against the Saiyan invasion. Their strength and courage saved us all. Thunderous applause rose from the crowd as Superboy stood before the Capitol, acutely aware of the people's gratitude and respect. He and his fellow heroes had lived up to every expectation. The president then unveiled a slate of new policies: tighter oversight and registration for all superheroes, expanded investment in scientific research, and strengthened military capabilities to protect Earth from future threats. She called on every citizen to unite and face the challenges ahead together. As the ceremony transitioned to Captain America's funeral, a light drizzle began to fall. Mourners watched in solemn silence as the flag-draped coffin was gently carried out and placed beside the freshly turned Earth. President America stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the hushed crowd. She paused at the graveside, bowed her head in a moment of silence, and then spoke with quiet conviction. Captain Stephen Rogers was the very definition of a hero. He devoted his life, and ultimately gave it, to defending our nation and safeguarding the world. His legacy of sacrifice, honor, and bravery will inspire us for generations to come. His passing is a profound loss to us all, but his spirit will continue to inspire every step we take. No sooner had the president spoken these words than the assembled crowd burst into thunderous applause. One by one, people approached the freshly dug grave, laying wreaths and bouquets to honor their fallen hero. The coffin bearing Captain America's remains was lowered gently into the earth. Silence fell over the mourners, their hearts heavy with respect and gratitude. A group of fellow heroes then stepped forward. One by one, they placed a hand on the polished mahogany lid, offering their private farewells. Among them was Superman, his usually steadfast composure shattered by grief. He knelt at the graveside, tears welling and blurring his vision. Though he battled to hold them back, they streamed down his face, unchecked. In a trembling whisper, he breathed into the cool air. "Steve, how could you leave us like this?" Nearby, Soldier Boy watched Superman's silent anguish with a furrowed brow. He turned away briefly, gathering his thoughts, then spoke in a low voice. "Steve was a true hero," he admitted, "but I never understood why he gave so much of himself. He should have been more selfish, lived for himself instead of everyone else." At this, Superboy lifted his head sharply, his eyes blazing. "Selfish?" he repeated, voice tight with indignation. "That's the one thing Steve never was. He sacrificed his life to buy us the precious time and opportunity to keep fighting. That's the mark of a true hero," Ethan said softly, staring at the freshly turned Earth. Soldier Boy sighed, his voice heavy. "You're right. I can't believe he's really gone." The two men stood in silence before Captain America's grave. Soldier Boy kept cursing under his breath, unable to accept the loss. Around them, every hero present felt Ethan's unwavering determination and faith radiate outward. They watched him in respectful silence, their hearts full of gratitude. In the days that followed the funeral, a wave of superhero fervor swept the globe. Ordinary people, awed by the courage and power of these champions, began to revere and even idolize them. Ethan emerged as one of the most popular and respected heroes in the world, yet he never let success breed complacency. He knew the Saiyans could return at any moment, and when they did, Earth would need him at his strongest. So Ethan redoubled his training, pushing his strength and skills farther than ever before. At the same time, the President of the United States publicly applauded Ethan and his fellow heroes. She announced the creation of an international superhero registration and oversight agency designed to harness, coordinate, and regulate superhuman abilities, ensuring that every power served the greater good. She also unveiled a comprehensive set of policies designed to support superheroes in their work and safeguard their rights. President America's proposal won overwhelming approval at home and quickly drew the attention of governments worldwide. Before long, a coalition of nations had agreed to help the United States set up official agencies for registering and overseeing superpowered individuals. Under President America's leadership, the world had begun to move forward in unity to foster and regulate its new generation of heroes. Inside the Black Palace's Grand Conference Chamber, delegations from every continent had gathered around a long, oval table. Their mission, to discuss the formation of a global superhero league, or GSL. The air crackled with anticipation and a little tension as each representative waited for the president to speak. President America leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute as she addressed the assembled leaders. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "with intelligence confirming that another Saiyan invasion may be imminent, we cannot afford hesitation. The Global Superhero League will give us a united front, pooling our resources, our finest heroes, and our best strategies into one coordinated force." A hushed murmur rippled through the room, then British Prime Minister James rose to speak. "Madam President," he said, "the United Kingdom fully endorses the concept of a GSL. Our concern, however, lies in preserving national sovereignty. We must ensure that while our heroes act together, each member nation retains the right to oversee its own forces." President America nodded appreciatively. "Point well taken, Prime Minister. The GSL will operate under a charter that recognizes and respects each country's autonomy. Our aim is cooperation, not command. Together, we will build a legal framework that balances collective defense with individual rights." Voices rang out in assent. One by one, representatives offered suggestions, some pressing for strict registration procedures, others demanding robust protection for civilian liberties. As the debate grew lively and even heated at moments, one thing became clear. The world had reached a turning point. United under the GSL's banner, humanity's defenders would soon stand ready to face whatever threats might emerge from beyond the stars. President Harrison America Grant sat behind the resolute desk, his expression calm but resolute. Across from him, Prime Minister Evelyn James of Great Britain studied him with cool, measured eyes. "Prime Minister," Grant began, his tone conciliatory, "I understand your concerns. Superheroes wield incredible power, and yes, We must be vigilant against any potential abuses, but we cannot simply stand by while a Saiyan invasion looms on our doorstep. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice steady. President Grant, I'm not questioning your intentions. My worry is that by pooling the world's greatest heroes under one banner, the Global Superhero League, we're handing over more power than any government could ever truly control. Who watches the Watchmen? Grant's fingers drummed on the desk. Precisely why we need this league. To set transparent guidelines, international oversight committees, standardized protocols, so every action is accounted for. It's the only way to harness these abilities safely while presenting a united front. You call it unity, she replied, but I see a recipe for catastrophe. Even the best bureaucracies buckle under pressure. What if our own champions decide our interests conflict with theirs? We could end up facing a disaster of our own making. Then we'll write that fail-safe into the charter, Grant countered. No executive action without unanimous council approval. Real-time reporting. Shared intelligence. If we don't act now, if we let mistrust keep us apart, the Saiyans will exploit our weaknesses. We risk whole cities, entire nations. Evelyn's jaw tightened. So you would rather gamble the lives of millions on the hope of perfect cooperation? Better to take that chance than to invite annihilation, he said quietly. I'm open to amendments, to any safeguards you propose, but doing nothing is not an option. She paused, weighing his words. Outside, the world waited, its fate suspended between the promise of heroic unity and the peril of unchecked power. Finally, Evelyn James spoke, her voice softer but still firm. Very well, Mr. President. I will bring this proposal before Parliament. But know this, if your global superhero league becomes a threat instead of a defense, Great Britain will not hesitate to withdraw its support. Grant offered a small, wry smile. Understood. That's why we build the league together, Prime Minister. One world, one defense, on our terms. They sat in silence, the fragile accord forged. Beyond the walls of the Oval Office, history prepared to turn its page. Chapter 453, Controversy. The emergency summit had barely begun when the room exploded into heated debate. Prime Minister James of Great Britain was the first to break the uneasy silence. President of the United States, he said, his voice edged with impatience. Don't be so arrogant. Superpowered individuals can be a tremendous asset, but they're also a ticking time bomb. On what authority do you presume to determine the fate of the entire world? This GSL proposal is far too rash. We need time, real time, to study its ramifications. France's delegation wasn't about to stay quiet. Their president leaned forward, a mocking smile playing at his lips. You keep insisting that superheroes are our only salvation, yet you haven't provided a single practical plan. Quite frankly, the GSL sounds like little more than a public relations stunt. Our nation cannot accept a proposal that tramples our sovereignty. The French president continued, voice rising. All you care about is America's security. You completely ignore the interests of the rest of us. This plan would seriously damage our economy and our political autonomy. I cannot support it. The American president rose, folding his arms across his chest. So now I'm the selfish one? He replied coolly. Let's be clear, I'm advocating for global safety. Superpowers aren't America's property alone. They belong to all humanity. The GSL framework exists to ensure those powers are used responsibly for the benefit of every nation, not to satisfy one country's ambitions. From the far end of the table, the Russian president slammed his fist lightly on the polished surface. Mr. President, he thundered, you're overstepping your authority. This so-called global oversight is blatantly unfair to Russia and risks igniting an even larger crisis. We demand a seat at the table, equal footing, or we walk away. As the room erupted once more into angry shouts and frantic gesture, it became painfully clear that reaching any consensus on the GSL proposal would be far more difficult and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. You must reconsider this plan, or we'll be forced to take other measures to protect our nation's safety, President Big Vodka warned, his tone grave. Dahe Crab nodded in agreement. I support President Big Vodka. The GSL proposal is riddled with uncertainties and potential risks. We need more time for research and debate to ensure it won't undermine global peace or stability. The room erupted in heated argument, emotions flaring on all sides. Yet ultimately, Thanks to President America's steadfast determination, the assembled delegates, from the United States and its allies to rival powers, reluctantly agreed to form the Global Superhero League, GSL. They understood, however, that this was only a provisional compromise. Many obstacles still lay ahead. News of the decision spread around the world within hours. In an unprecedented move, governments everywhere had joined forces to establish the Global Superhero League, to oversee, coordinate, and manage the world's superhero contingents. The age of unilateral action was over. The era of collective oversight had begun. The world has never been more united in its determination to defend itself. In response to the looming threat of a renewed Saiyan invasion, a new organization, known simply as the Global Superhero Alliance, has been formed. Its membership spans every continent, drawing together extraordinary individuals whose powers, when combined, might stand a chance against the might of another Saiyan onslaught. At the same time, President America has introduced a comprehensive superhero protection plan. Under this initiative, heroes receive far more than just gratitude. They're granted guaranteed personal security, robust property coverage, and formal recognition of their unique contributions to society. Beyond these measures, the plan calls for a dedicated support network, specialized social services tailored to heroes' needs, including psychological counseling, ongoing health management, and educational assistance for those still in training. The goal is clear: to ensure that every hero can live a long, fulfilling life, even as they safeguard the peace of the planet. News of the protection plan and of the Global Superhero Alliance has ignited excitement the world over. Ordinary people, inspired by the prospect of working alongside these champions, have flocked to volunteer, donate, or simply spread the word. Even celebrated icons like Superboy, already one of the globe's most beloved and respected figures, have thrown their full weight behind the movement. With President America's leadership and Superboy's example, this new wave of enthusiasm may well prove humanity's greatest asset in the face of galactic peril. Many of the world's heroes have greeted the new government initiative with enthusiasm, noting that the added resources and official backing allow them to pursue their missions with greater confidence and focus. Leading the charge was Superboy, arguably the most beloved and respected hero on Earth, who publicly endorsed the plan from the start. He argues that government support and guarantees will strengthen their ability to preserve global peace, and he stressed that unity is humanity's greatest asset when facing any threat. Beyond Superboy's endorsement, several major teams and individuals have also voiced their opinions. In the weeks since the announcement, the Fantastic Five and the Teen Titans nearly disbanded and reformed, ultimately emerging under a more streamlined structure. Alongside Superboy, both Wonder Woman and Supergirl have stepped forward as the so-called New Big Three, lending their considerable influence to the initiative. Together, they applaud the plan's promise of coordination and accountability. Yet not all heroes are convinced. A handful worry that government oversight could curtail their independence or tie them up in red tape. Batgirl, for example, has built her reputation on stealth, self-reliance, and discretion, qualities she fears may be compromised by too many official mandates. As the debate unfolds, it's clear that the line between support and supervision will be critical to how this initiative shapes the future of heroism. President America sat at the head of the roundtable in the newly established Global Superhero League headquarters, flanked by representatives from nations around the world and several of the League's most respected heroes. Tension still lingered in the air. Many of the invited heroes had reservations about government oversight and feared losing their independence. "Thank you all for coming," President America began, his voice steady but earnest. "I know there's been concern. Some of you worry that accepting government support will compromise your freedom. Let me be clear, that is not our intention. Our aim is to empower you, to give you the resources and logistical backing you need so that you can continue protecting Earth more effectively." He motioned toward the League's newly drafted Superhero Guarantee Plan, displayed on a large screen behind him. This plan guarantees your autonomy in the field, while providing rapid response coordination, legal protection, and access to cutting-edge equipment. In return, We ask only that you share intelligence we gather on global threats and participate in League missions when available. By uniting under one banner, we can respond to crises faster and save more lives. Across the table, Starfire clenched and unclenched her fists. And if we disagree with a decision, what safeguards protect us from being overridden by political interests? Good question, President America replied. The League will be governed by a rotating council of heroes, elected by you, not appointed by any government. No mission goes ahead without a majority vote from the council. In this way, your voices remain paramount. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. One by one, the skeptical heroes nodded. After hours of detailed discussion, debating command structures, funding sources, and rules of engagement, most finally expressed their support. The walls that suspicion had built around them began to crumble. That afternoon, the city center square was transformed into a public forum. Flags from every nation fluttered on makeshift poles. News cameras surrounded a platform draped in red, white, and blue, and the buzz of the crowd was electric. Citizens and reporters jostled for position, eager to hear what the president had to say. When he stepped up to the podium, President America's presence commanded immediate silence. Fellow citizens, honored heroes, he began, today marks a new chapter in humanity's quest for peace and security. Our superheroes risk everything to keep us safe. Their bravery has brought calm to the streets, hope to the helpless, and courage to our hearts. He paused, letting the applause die down before continuing. The Global Superhero League and the Superhero Guarantee Plan are our pledge to these extraordinary individuals. We will stand by them, just as they have stood by us. Together, we will face any challenge, anywhere in the world. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Ethan, a young recruit who had watched these events unfold from the audience, felt a surge of purpose. He had trained for years under the guidance of League mentors, and now, with a formal alliance in place, he understood that he and his fellow heroes would no longer be isolated lone wolves, but part of a united force for good. In the days that followed, teams formed, strategy sessions were held, and communication lines were opened between governments and League members. The initial apprehension among the heroes gave way to a shared optimism. They saw that with cooperation came greater strength, and that by working together, they could better protect the world they loved. Now, we must give our heroes even more support and protection so they can face whatever challenges lie ahead with greater courage, the president declared to the assembled crowd. Superman strode forward to lend his voice. He thanked the president and the citizens for their steadfast backing, then pledged, "I will do everything in my power to preserve Earth's peace and safety. As superheroes, it is our duty to defend humanity from every threat. With the government's support and protection, we can carry out that duty more effectively than ever." A few murmurs of concern rippled through the audience. Some wondered whether this new partnership might let the government dictate the heroes' actions, turning a protective plan into a form of control. The president met those worries head-on. "Let me be clear," he said. "We have no intention of interfering in the autonomous work of our superheroes. Our role is simply to provide the resources and security they need. Together, we'll safeguard peace around the globe, not limit anyone's freedom or judgment." As the applause settled, hands shot up across the plaza. A young girl, her eyes shining with curiosity, called out, "Superman, if something goes wrong, will you still protect us?" Superman paused, smiled reassuringly, and replied, "Always." Ethan leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "What do you think of the government's new protection plan for superheroes? Do you see it changing your day-to-day life?" Superman considered the question for a moment before answering. "I believe this initiative is meant to help us perform our duties more effectively. With the government's assurances and support behind us, we can focus entirely on defending the planet without getting sidetracked by lesser concerns." Chapter 454, The Most Powerful Man on Earth. With the formation of the GSL, Ethan's Black Chapter Department secured its place among the world's leading superhuman organizations. Yet from the start, fierce debate erupted over which nation would assume the GSL's presidency. Every country fancied itself the natural leader. After all, superhumans have become the nuclear deterrents of a new age. Nations long cowed by traditional atomic standoffs now see in superpowered operatives a chance to rewrite the rules. Meanwhile, those few states that have already breached the nuclear monopoly of the old powers view GSL leadership as an opportunity to cement their breakthrough. No government is naive. Controlling the GSL means shaping the world's strategic future. Whether a potential threat or a beacon of hope, the League has altered the global balance irrevocably. Whoever leads the GSL steers tomorrow's world has become the mantra among heads of state. As a result, each nation has dispatched its sharpest diplomats, eager to outmaneuver rivals and claim the presidency. Laid-law proposals, back-channel negotiations, subtle threats. They follow in succession as capitals from Washington to Beijing and Moscow to Brasilia jockey for position. Amid this diplomatic maelstrom, Ethan watches without surprise. He knows how much power the League's presidency confers, and he knows how fiercely his allies and adversaries will contest it. For the sake of global stability and for the future of superhuman kind, the next few weeks will be decisive. Whoever emerges on top will truly be the most powerful leader on Earth. Everyone realizes this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape the world's balance of power and vault their nation to the very top. No government wants to miss out on the chance to claim a decisive voice in the newly formed Global Superhero League, GSL. Yet dominance won't come easily. By design, the GSL requires every registered hero to unite against threats that endanger all of humanity, an ideal that masks just how unwilling each country is to bow to another's command. Behind the scenes, every major power pursues its own strategy. Some offer hefty economic incentives to win loyalty, while others stage grand military exercises to showcase their might. A handful seeks to broker alliances among fellow superpowers, hoping a block of equals can steer the GSL in their favor. Meanwhile, in the Southern Hemisphere, nations across Australia, Africa, and South America conduct their own quiet contests, determined to raise their global standing by carving out a stake in the League. Far from ushering in an age of peace, the GSL's establishment has only intensified competition and ignited fresh conflicts. Each country still guards its sovereignty fiercely, convinced that the greatest threat to world security is not the monsters beyond our borders, but the rival nations that stand beside us. Tensions between nations continued to rise, and some governments even began secretly developing superhero technologies to tip the balance of power in their favor. In the midst of it all, a growing number of countries came to see that controlling the GSL wasn't the highest priority. Far more important were international cooperation, mutual trust, and a shared commitment to the planet's future. With that in mind, they started to address their differences through dialogue and negotiation, working to steer the GSL toward a more just, equitable, and effective global force. Of course, that promised path was anything but easy. Competing national interests and conflicting philosophies made consensus difficult, and the specter of new external threats meant the world could face fresh crises at any moment. Just then, a delegate from a small African nation rose to speak. "We urge the GSL to focus on the real problems facing Earth," he said, his voice firm. "Use the power of superheroes to help the poor and the oppressed. Let it be a force for peace, not a tool to deepen the divisions between countries." His words resonated deeply with many of the other representatives in the hall. The American delegate frowned. "It's not that we're ignoring other concerns," he said, "but as the world's largest power, we have a responsibility to steer the GSL and safeguard Earth." The Chinese defense representative smiled. "Every nation carries its own duties," he replied. "We aren't challenging America's leadership. We simply believe in equality and partnership. Only by working as equals can every country help confront external threats." At that moment, the GSL's members paused to reconsider their founding purpose. They realized that only through genuine unity could they protect the planet from danger. Determined to close gaps and strengthen collaboration, they set to work forging new alliances. Several nations stepped forward first, reaching out across borders to promote deeper cooperation. They pledged not only to look after their own interests, but also to advance the common good, aiming to play ever more constructive roles within the GSL. After years of determined effort, the member nations began to see real results. The Global Super League, GSL, has grown more unified and efficient, and international cooperation has deepened. Together, they've rolled out cutting-edge technologies and refined new combat tactics, steadily strengthening the world's superpowered defenses. Looming over this alliance is the GSL headquarters, a gleaming tower in the heart of rebuilt Washington, D.C., a symbol of America's unwavering commitment to global security. Ethan, the youngest Superman in history, never imagined he'd be thrust into a leadership role so quickly. Yet today, at just 16, he was officially named director of the GSL, inheriting an authority that even some veteran heroes must respect. His older brother, Clark, still holds the title of Earth's most powerful being, but as a teenager, Ethan is far more susceptible to outside influence, a fact the League's organizers have noted. Even Wonder Woman, Diana Prince, looks on with a hint of deference. With the chain of command finalized, Diana steps in as deputy director, guiding strategy and international diplomacy. Meanwhile, Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, has been elevated to S-Class status, the highest rank reserved for those capable of facing even Saiyan-level threats head-on. In this new era of cooperation, the world's mightiest champions stand ready, under Ethan's surprising but formidable leadership, to protect Earth from whatever challenges lie ahead. Earth's greatest threat right now is the Saiyan invasion, and in the GSL, any disaster that endangers the entire planet is classified as S-Class. Authority within the Global Superhero League hinges on those classifications. At present, Earth counts only 3 S-Class heroes, 4 if Martian Manhunter, Uncle John, ever shows himself. We saw him briefly at the end of Justice League vs. Steppenwolf, so he clearly exists in this movie universe. It's a mystery why Raditz never crossed paths with him when all hell broke loose. "Brother, I'm seriously under a ton of stress," Superboy blurted the moment he stepped through the door. He found Ethan sprawled on the couch, looking utterly relaxed. Ethan glanced up with an easy grin. "Hey, chill out. You're officially the most powerful man on Earth. Thousands of girls would kill for a date with you. Who knows, maybe even Bruce will fall for you." Clark shook his head in disbelief. Bruce? Come on. In Clark's memory, Bluth was as formidable as they came, his childhood sweetheart, and someone he'd never dared to take advantage of. Yet here, Ethan was, casually suggesting otherwise. I had never given a second thought to what falling in love with Bruce might feel like. Christ, that would be pure torture. Snapping out of his reverie, Clark turned to his brother. "Ethan, you're obviously stronger than I am. Why won't you step up?" Clark felt the weight of leadership bearing down on him. He could follow orders like any good soldier, but he wasn't cut out to give them. Ethan, by contrast, had everything it took to be director of the GSL organization. Clark couldn't help imagine, knowing how incredible it would be to fight side by side with him. Chapter 455, Tricking Clark. Ethan stood in the dimly lit war room, the hum of machinery echoing behind him. Across the metal table, Clark's eyes narrowed with frustration. "It's not that I didn't want to help," Ethan began, his voice calm. "I simply never found the right moment." Clark slammed a fist against the table. "What about when Raditz invaded? You were right there, and you did nothing." Ethan held up a hand to steady him. "You've got it wrong. I was at the battlefield from the start, but I stayed hidden. Unless you're in immediate danger, I won't reveal my presence. You're Earth's champion, the savior everyone looks to. That role is yours alone. I prefer to guide events from the shadows." Clark's frown deepened. "Guide from the shadows? What are you talking about?" A soft, almost amused smile curved Ethan's lips. "Think of it like a chessboard. There's the White King, open and defended, the piece everyone sees. That's you. And then there's the Black King, concealed until the right moment strikes. That's what I am, the Black Emperor." The term hung in the air, strange and unsettling. Clark's brow arched. "The Black Emperor?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, during Raditz's attack, his arrogance worked in our favor. He underestimated Earth completely. But consider this. What if the next invaders are more careful? What if they scout every weakness before they strike?" Clark's jaw clenched as he absorbed the warning. "You expect aliens to learn from that mistake and come back better prepared." "Exactly." Ethan leaned forward, eyes fierce. "If we rely solely on brute force or public heroes, we risk being outmaneuvered. I'll gather intelligence, remove threats covertly, and manipulate events so you can face the enemy head-on without surprises." Silence fell between them as Clark weighed Ethan's words. Finally, he exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. All right, but if you're going to be my phantom strategist, there can't be any more secrets. Ethan extended his hand, confident. Agreed. From now on, the Black Emperor works in concert with Earth's champion. Together, we stand a real chance, both in the light and the dark. Clark clasped Ethan's hand, sealing their fragile alliance. Beyond the war room's reinforced doors, the world rested on the edge of a blade, and they would need both the hero the world could see and the emperor no one suspected to keep it safe. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. Our enemies are like wolves, cunning and merciless. They'll stop at nothing to pry into our operations, piece together every scrap of intelligence, and then use our own vulnerabilities against us. Clark frowned, absorbing his brother's words. So we're talking about cyber spies, hackers who can infiltrate our systems and expose our secrets? Exactly, Ethan nodded. If they get hold of our data on superheroes, their abilities, their personal lives, the fallout would be catastrophic. They could manipulate our weaknesses, even leverage our loved ones as pawns. That's why we need someone who works entirely in the shadows, a master hacker so discreet that no one even knows his true identity. We call him the Black Emperor. Clark's expression shifted from confusion to something resembling respect. He still didn't fully understand why Ethan insisted on staying hidden while directing the operation, but he couldn't deny the strategy's brilliance. He glanced at his brother and felt the weight of Ethan's careful planning. Ethan watched Clark's face clear, relief washing over him. His explanation had landed, yet he knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the true battle for control of information, lay ahead. Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. Clark, think this through. If the aliens already have intelligence on us, they'll use it to plan their defenses and strategies in advance. They could fortify their positions or set traps, leaving us perpetually on the back foot. In that scenario, we'd be reacting all the time, barely able to mount an effective offense, let alone win. Clark frowned for a moment, then nodded. I see what you mean. With our data, they'd always stay one step ahead and keep us off balance. Exactly. Ethan's tone was firm. That's why we need someone operating behind the scenes, someone with the wisdom to anticipate their moves and the authority to make the tough calls when it matters most. A spark of realization lit Clark's eyes. That person has to be you, Ethan. You've got the strategic mind, the leadership, and the guts. You're perfect for the role. Ethan offered a small, rueful smile. I appreciate the vote of confidence, Clark, but I'm hardly the only one. There are countless heroes and capable leaders on our planet who could do the job just as well. They all possess extraordinary powers and unparalleled wisdom, Ethan continued, his gaze steady. If we unite, we stand a real chance against the alien threat. Clark regarded his older brother with a mixture of awe and doubt. And that's where the Black Emperor comes in? Ethan nodded. Exactly. I'll assemble a covert team, heroes in hiding, even the supervillains who can be trusted. They'll be my black pawns. You and the public league will be the white pawns, the face of our defense. Together, we'll coordinate every move, visible and invisible. Clark leaned back, tapping a finger against his chin. He'd always admired Ethan's strategic mind and raw strength. Now, hearing this proposal, he felt it made unsettling sense. If Raditz alone could almost level half of America, the planet needed more than scattered champions. It needed a supreme commander to keep things from spiraling into chaos. Ethan spoke with quiet conviction, laying out his plan as if it were the only reasonable path forward. Clark found himself persuaded. After all, who could question the judgment of the brother who'd time and again saved lives from threats no one else could face? He exhaled slowly. All right, Ethan, I'll back you. Let's make this work and save the world. Ethan sat across from his younger Clark in the dimly lit strategy room. Clark's brow furrowed as he digested Ethan's proposal. You want to recruit super criminals as our tanks and soldiers? Clark asked, incredulity creeping into his voice. Ethan nodded. Exactly. These people have all broken the law, but not all of them are irredeemably evil. Many turn to crime out of ambition, desperation, or circumstance. If we can guide their talents and keep them under tight control, they could become a powerful line of defense against the coming alien invasion. Clark leaned back, crossing his arms. I get the theory, But I worry about the practice. They're criminals, people who've already shown they'll bend or break any rule to get what they want. How can we trust them not to turn on us? Ethan met his brother's gaze. You're right to question it. We can't simply conscript every supervillain we capture. We'll establish a rigorous screening process, psychological evaluations, in-depth background checks, then ideological conditioning. Only those who demonstrate genuine restraint and a basic sense of justice will be eligible. Clark exhaled, the tension in his shoulders showing. And if one of them snaps? If they break free of our control? Ethan's eyes grew cold. Then we'll deal with them as we would any other enemy combatant. No second chances. If they turn rogue, we neutralize the threat immediately. Our top priority is protecting Earth, not reforming monsters. Clark studied the ceiling for a moment, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. All right, but our vetting has to be airtight. No room for mistakes. Ethan leaned forward, determination in his posture. Agreed. I'll assemble the screening committee today. Let's get started. The two brothers fell silent, each lost in thought. Outside, the world prepared for war, but inside these walls, a new kind of army was already taking shape. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as he studied the holographic report hovering between them. Those criminals who are willing to reform and fight for the planet deserve a second chance, he said quietly. Clark looked up, relief washing over his features. That's a comforting thought, he admitted, but we must handle this carefully. One misstep, and we could invite more trouble than we solve. Ethan nodded. Exactly. We need a strict oversight system, checks and balances that ensure these supercriminals can't turn on ordinary citizens while they're enlisted on our side. Taking a deep breath, Clark met his brother's gaze. He recognized how many details still needed sorting, the selection process, the training protocols, the legal safeguards, but he was confident they could work it out together. Ethan, I'll stand by you every step of the way. We'll put this plan into motion smoothly and protect the peace of our world. Clark's tone was firm, his resolve unshakable. In that moment, the two brothers shared an unspoken vow. United, they would meet every challenge and secure Earth's safety, no matter the obstacles ahead. Chapter 456, Reunion. Ethan, thank you. If we stand united, there's nothing we can't overcome. Clark squeezed his brother's hand, determination shining in his eyes. Ethan returned the gesture with equal resolve. After all the misunderstandings and old resentments, they'd finally found common ground, and a shared mission. The future of Earth depended on their solidarity. Clark loosened the knot in his heart, guilt still tugging at him for having judged Ethan too quickly. But Ethan bore no grudge. He was focused on what really mattered. Everything's falling into place in the DC universe, he said with a confident smile. Next time the Kryptonians come calling, let's reroute them straight to the Marvel side and see how they handle them. He laughed softly at the thought of Superman's people crashing into a world already on high alert. With Thor off restoring order across the 9 realms, Marvel's front line was thin. Captain Marvel Carol Danvers, Captain America in his blue Hulk form, the Green Hulk, and Tony Stark. There might even be hidden allies waiting in the shadows, ready to spring into action. And if we end up with some free time, Ethan added, I wouldn't mind dropping in on the One Punch Man universe to recruit Lord Boros and the others. Side by side, the brothers stood ready. No matter where the next threat emerged, in DC, in Marvel, or beyond, they would face it together. Ethan had come to a simple conclusion. Taking on Saitama was a one-way ticket to annihilation. He needed a new challenge, perhaps a showdown with the mightiest heroes of Marvel and DC. After all, they were all destined to fall before him sooner or later. Why not have a little fun first and give Boros the spectacle he craved? With that in mind, Ethan opened a gateway to the Super Seminary universe. He'd nearly been transformed into an archangel by the supreme god in the DC realm, a fate he'd narrowly escaped. Now his thoughts turned to Chelan and the others. The Marvel and DC universes, as dangerous as they were fascinating, posed too many risks. Even though each faction occupied its own imperial dimension, those dimensions served only as playgrounds for the supreme god and the inscrutable great will. Far safer, Ethan decided, to keep his friends in an entirely different universe, one he already controlled. The moment he arrived in Super Seminary, he set to work. With a slight flick of his will, he slowed the flow of time around Chillin and the rest. To them, mere minutes passed. To Ethan, long enough to step away and prepare for whatever grand battle lay ahead, without ever leaving his allies alone in the void. Chapter 7. The Rising Heat. Ethan lounged against the mossy boulder, Chillin curled comfortably in his arms. Delena's cheeks puffed in annoyance as she folded her arms. "Hey, let me sit there too," she demanded, balancing on the edge of the stone. Chillin blushed and began to shift aside, but Ethan gently settled her back into place. "Don't spoil her," he murmured, his voice warm. He glanced at Delena with a teasing lift to his brow. "Chillin is our main wife. You must uphold her station. Queens don't yield their thrones." Delena huffed, but slid down to perch beside Ethan. For a moment the three of them shared a private smile, until Delena's expression suddenly went rigid. "You two are going to get us killed," she hissed. Ethan and Chillin looked at each other in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Chillin asked softly. Without answering, Delena's fingers worked quickly to loosen the knotted straps around their wrists. A distant drumbeat echoed through the clearing, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan squinted toward the tree line. Shadowy figures, painted in earthy reds and ochres, stepped forward, their bare feet striking the ground in time with the drum's pulse. A warm breeze slipped through the trees, carrying the delicate perfume of peach blossoms. Delena's hair fluttered, and beyond her, fields of golden wheat erupted into view, stalks heavy with ears of grain that swayed as if in celebration. Then, as if the world itself were holding its breath, a brilliant shaft of sunlight pierced the foliage overhead. The light blinded them for a heartbeat, then settled into a scorching brilliance that bathed the clearing in molten gold. Ethan's skin prickled with heat. Chillin's breath caught in her throat, and Delena, wide-eyed beside them, whispered, "This isn't the garden anymore." In that moment, the morning playfulness was swept away, replaced by the tumult of an ancient rite, and the three of them realized they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple game. Ethan slipped away at dawn, vanishing into the shadows of the sprawling complex. By the time He looked up from her workstation, he was already beside her, watching her study the data streaming across her screen. She hadn't heard him come in. Her mind was entirely absorbed in the questions haunting her about her current condition and what new power she might yet unlock. "What are you working on?" Ethan asked quietly. She started, blinking at him. Then the alarm klaxons shattered the stillness. A brilliant red light bathed the lab as a voice crackled over the intercom. The central command hub was under attack. She's heart hammered in her chest. She leaned forward, fingers flying over the controls, but her panic only grew, until Ethan's calm voice cut through her fear. "I've got this," he said gently. For a moment the tension drained from her shoulders. She turned to him, mask of irritation quickly slipping back into place. "Go find your other wives," she snapped, "and don't bother me." Ethan raised an eyebrow. He'd read her true feelings too easily. If he tried to leave now, she'd chase him down. He let a small, knowing smile cross his face. His singular goal, after all, was to stay by her side, and he wondered, not for the first time, who would break first. Since Ethan's return, she found herself struggling to concentrate. What she felt for him was no longer just a statistical match of souls. It was real, deep, dangerously so. Swallowing her pride, she severed her fragile alliance with Tiangong and rerouted the hub's defenses under her own command. "Ethan, I'm in position," she said, voice steady once more. She handed him back control of the hub's tactical grid. Ethan tapped a few commands, then turned to his assembled forces. "Advance on my mark." He raised his fist. "Now!" With a roar, the soldiers charged forward. Bullets tore through the air in sharp, whistling arcs. Men fell, scrambling for cover. The clam of bayonets rang out as hand-to-hand combat erupted at the perimeter. In that moment, amidst chaos and steel on steel, Ethan and she stood united, each playing to their strengths, each unwilling to yield. Ethan watched Chillin work with a kind of grim fascination. She stood at the stone countertop, razor-sharp knife in hand, carving the roast with deliberate, almost tender precision. First, she scored the meat, then patted it dry. She seasoned it exactly to her taste, salt and pepper, a few capers, a fresh bay leaf, before tossing in chopped onions and a squeeze of lemon juice. Finally, she slid the marinated cut into the oven and adjusted the stove's flame until it glowed just right. Once the kitchen calmed, Ethan lingered by Cheelin and the others, saying nothing. After a moment, she broke the silence. "I'd like to have a child," she admitted, her voice low. He looked up, surprised. "We're all immortals," he reminded her gently. "What need do we have for children? We don't grow old, we don't die." Cheelin's face fell. Ethan's blunt refusal stung, and it seemed Hexie felt the same. But then Hexie stepped forward with a soft smile. "If a child is what you truly want, I'll help you have one." Cheelin stared at her, speechless. She'd never grown accustomed to the capricious whims and whimsies of gods, immortal or otherwise. "I thank you," she murmured, still uneasy. Ethan reached out and pulled Cheelin into a reassuring embrace. "Forget about having a child if it bothers you," he whispered. "I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Cheelin leaned into him, her shoulders relaxing. Since Ethan felt that way, she knew there was nothing more to say. In truth, she'd only mentioned wanting a child because her parents had been nagging her, an odd concern when none of them aged or feared death. Now, with that pressure lifted, she realized she was content simply being by Ethan's side. Chapter 7. The Search for True Power. After weeks of study and quiet camaraderie in the Super Seminary universe, Ethan finally stepped away. He'd gained invaluable knowledge from the world's ancient libraries and its masters of cosmic lore, but he still hungered for more. Power awaited in the realms of DC and Marvel, meta-human abilities, alien armaments, eldritch artifacts, but every one of those paths carried hidden costs. Pledge yourself to the Green Lantern Corps, and you become a guardian soldier, hoist Mjolnir, and you answer to Odin. Even Galactus, the devourer of worlds, claimed near omnipotence, yet he, too, fell in the end. In comic book cosmology, invincibility can vanish in an instant. Ethan paused in the flux between dimensions, the shimmering halo of his world jump field humming softly. Apart from the Kryptonian blueprint grafted into him by that nameless patron at the start of his journey, everything he wielded had come from outside sources. His experiments, like fusing Broly's unstoppable Saiyan fury with Doomsday's regenerative might, had produced fascinating results, but none stemmed from his own inner reserves. He loathed feeling like a puppet, his strings pulled by every universe he visited. What he needed was an edge no one could ever revoke, genuine transcendence born of his own making. That edge, he realized, was the very gift that set him apart, his ability to traverse realities at will. Among Kryptonians, such power was virtually unheard of, an ability that outshone even the greatest marvels of the DC universe. With each leap to a new world, Ethan could harvest latent energies, master forbidden techniques, and forge his destiny free from any cosmic overseer. Focusing his will, he charted his next crossing. Beyond the glittering tapestry of alternate Earths lay hidden realms of dormant legacies and unclaimed power. This time, he swore, he would emerge not as a pawn of alien councils or godlike patrons, but as his own master. With that resolve, Ethan dove into the multiverse once more, determined to carve out a domain where no external force could ever clip his wings. Chapter 457. A Kryptonian's Transcendent Power. Ethan hovered at the threshold of the shimmering gateway, his heart pounding. To break free from the confines of one universe, to slip past the boundaries of the DC multiverse itself, and journey into entirely new realities. That was the definition of transcendent power. Yet despite having already crossed that threshold, Ethan still couldn't fathom how he'd awakened such an ability. At first, he'd chalked it up to the extraordinary resilience of Kryptonian physiology. But the more he considered it, the more it felt impossible. Even cosmic enigmas like the Silver Superman had never demonstrated this level of power. Ethan's newfound gift far surpassed any upper limit he believed a Kryptonian could ever reach. Was this phenomenal capability an extension of his own alien heritage? Or had some unknown force, the same entity that granted him Kryptonian potential, imbued him with something altogether different? Such questions swirled in his mind as he searched for a path to transcendence. Then an audacious thought struck him. Was he now in the position of Superboy Prime? That infamous hero had come from Earth Prime, an original, real world where characters like the Justice League existed only in comic books. Aware of his fictional status, Superboy Prime had even infiltrated the offices of the comics' editors, lashing out at the very people who penned his destiny. Could Ethan's situation mirror that of the legendary Superboy Prime? If so, it meant he wasn't simply a Kryptonian with superpowers. He might occupy a realm beyond fiction itself. And if that were true, then the possibilities before him were limitless. Chapter 7. Rending Reality, the Fourth Wall, and the Sixth Dimension. Ethan stood on the edge of the cosmos, every nerve ending thrumming with power. For centuries, legends had whispered of one Kryptonian who went beyond super strength or flight, who shattered the boundaries between fiction and reality itself. That being was Superboy Prime, and tonight Ethan was determined to follow in his footsteps. Superboy Prime owed his terrifying might not only to the yellow sun, but to a unique gift, the ability to rewrite existence by sheer force of will. Where other Kryptonians draw strength from solar radiation alone, Prime could flex the very laws of physics as if they were clay beneath his fingers. With a furious punch, he might erase a star. With a thought, he could erase an entire universe. It was this ability, simple, brutal reality warping, that set him leagues above every other son of Krypton. Yet he was not the only god-level entity capable of reshaping existence. Perpetua, matriarch of the Source's Hand Clan and architect of the DC multiverse, wields 7 primal cosmic forces granted by the Source itself. Through them she sculpts realms, births timelines, and binds destiny to her iron will. Dr. Manhattan, too, bends reality, his mastery born from atomic transcendence, tapping into the universe's positive energies, a power not unlike Perpetua's own. And even Batman, the Dark Knight, rides a more subtle edge. He channels connection energy, the positive life force of creation, and crisis energy, its destructive counterpart, trading blows with universe-shaking foes who would unravel existence. Tonight, Ethan would learn to walk among these titans. With each breath, he felt the barrier between story and substance grow thin, the fourth wall trembling as though aware of his presence. Beyond lay the sixth dimension, a realm of pure potential where thought became matter and will alone sculpted reality. To break through, he would need to summon more than raw strength. He would need precise control, an unshakable focus forged in equal parts fear and determination. Ethan closed his eyes and willed himself forward. The world around him blurred. Galaxies drifted past like grains of sand. At his command, the stars rearranged themselves into cryptic glyphs, each one a fragment of the cosmic code. He could feel Perpetua's 7 forces humming at the edge of his awareness. The glow F Manhattan's positive energies pulsing against its fringe, even the dark whisper of crisis energy brushing his consciousness. Then, with a roar that shook the foundations of reality, Ethan thrust his fist through that final veil. The fourth wall snapped open, and he stepped into the sixth dimension, where narrative ended and pure being began. Here, in the boundless crossroads of existence, he would learn whether sheer will alone could stand against the ultimate powers that shaped all universes. And in that place beyond worlds, Ethan vowed he would carve out his own legend. Ethan watched in awe as god-level beings bent reality itself by channeling unimaginable energies. Superboy Prime, however, stood apart. Rather than drawing on cosmic forces, he rewrote existence through sheer physical might. In the 2020 event Dark Knight's Death Metal, the Laughing Bat absorbed crisis energy and mutated into the Dark Knight. Wielding this dark power, he reshaped the multiverse into what he called the last 52 universes, each one a twisted realm of perpetual night. From those corrupted worlds, he forged an unstoppable army and unleashed it on the heroes of the main universe. When a shadow version of Superman charged at Superboy Prime, it was no contest. In seconds, Prime struck him down, and the instant the dark Superman fell, the oppressive gloom of his universe lifted, flooded by bright, cleansing sunlight. Seizing the moment, Superboy Prime hurled every ounce of his strength at the Dark Knight, landing a cataclysmic final blow. The impact reverberated across all 52 dark universes, shattering their bonds of shadow and restoring them to light. But victory came at a cost. Prime himself collapsed to Earth, his condition unknown, too weak to stand, yet too triumphant to deny the world its rebirth. By the force of one man's will, the entire multiverse had been rewritten once more. Ethan's feats in the DC universe stand almost alone, second only to the main universe Superman of 2018 in terms of going toe-to-toe with cosmic forces without outside help. Recall that 2018 Superman shattered the multiverse with a single strike, and even overpowered the six-dimensional God Forge Alpheus. Those were astonishing accomplishments, but they don't quite match what Ethan, the Prime Superboy, achieved. It's important to draw a line between shattering reality and remaking it. When Ethan appeared in the 2005 Infinite Crisis, he literally tore reality itself apart, and then went even further, demonstrating an even greater ability to reshape existence to his will. By contrast, Alpheus never approached that level. In fact, Alpheus needed to fuse with his brothers Monov and Mobius to become the ultimate monitor, only then reaching a power comparable to Perpetua, the mother of creation. Yet Perpetua fell to the Dark Knight, which proves beyond doubt that the Dark Knight's strength eclipses Alpheus's. As if reality-shattering weren't enough, Ethan also possesses dimensional travel. During Infinite Crisis, he punched through the celestial dimension and emerged on New Earth, proving that his mastery over the multiverse extends far beyond raw power. In every sense, Ethan's reality-warping and universe-hopping feats set a new standard that even Superman and the Ultimate Monitor can't surpass. Ethan stood alone in the void between worlds, recalling the day he first chased Superman across the multiverse. It was during the 2009 Final Crisis countdown that he'd learned just how far the Man of Steel could push reality. Superman Prime, the version of Kal-El who had survived the collapse and rebirth of all existence, had even torn himself free from the Speed Force. Every Flash in history, whether Barry Allen, Wally West, or any other speedster, remained trapped in that swirling prison. Yet Superman Prime simply flexed his will against it and shattered its boundaries. That moment of raw power forced Ethan to ask himself a hard question. Why had he spent years building gadgets and running endless experiments instead of tapping into his own solar potential? He knew he possessed the genetic gift to transcend universes by sheer strength alone. If he'd abandoned his machines and devoted himself entirely to sun-soaking, if he'd let his body evolve naturally, wouldn't he be infinitely more powerful now? He labeled that line of thinking naive. In truth, his progress had crawled along until a single encounter ignited him. When Ethan first crossed paths with Broly, the unstoppable Saiyan berserker, he saw a mirror of what untamed power could become. He studied Broly's primal fury alongside Doomsday's brutal adaptability and wove their lessons into his own training. The transformation was immediate. By integrating their raw savagery with his solar-charged physiology, Ethan vaulted past the limits he once thought unbreakable. No longer content with artificial enhancements, he now advanced through disciplined evolution, proving that sometimes the strongest force is the one you find within yourself. Ethan hovered at the edge of a windswept precipice, the razor-cold air whipping around him. He closed his eyes, sensing the currents of power that still thrummed through his veins, and wondered, how long has it been since I first reached this strength? He opened his eyes to a dark, frozen sky and let his thoughts wander back to the two greatest beings in all creation, the Supreme God and the One above all. Both had singled him out, each for their own inscrutable reasons. The Supreme God, ever playful, had treated the cosmos like a grand stage, Ethan, his favorite actor, and the One above all had watched closely too, no doubt wary of what might happen if Ethan lost control of the forces at his command. A memory flickered to life. In another realm, the Supreme God had offered him the rank of Archangel, an office of incomparable might. Ethan had refused, the power was too unbalanced, so the Supreme God wove that archangelic authority into Ethan's very soul instead. It lay dormant now. An angelic arsenal meant only to counter Lucifer himself. Meanwhile, the One above all, fearful that the combined might of the Infinity Stones might overwhelm him, had personally overseen their fusion into his being. He understood now why they'd both been so attentive. Had he walked away from all he'd gained, he might have been physically weaker in this battered new reality, but as a Kryptonian transcendent, he'd still outshine even Superboy Prime. Such an anomaly demanded divine scrutiny. All traces of that swirling void of power trailed behind him like a comet's tail as Ethan stepped onto unfamiliar ground. No sun warmed the ice fields around him. Only a featureless sky loomed overhead. Raising his arms, he summoned the wind, coaxed the low-hanging clouds to part, and beckoned distant starlight closer. As the stars drifted into view, Their cold brilliance settled on the frozen plain, illuminating Ethan's determined face and heralding the next act of his extraordinary journey. The ice and snow had finally thawed, and golden sunlight bathed the land in a warm glow. Ethan lifted his gaze to the bright sky, his mind already racing through the possibilities. Thanks to his remarkable intellect, every option and outcome played out like equations in his head, because today he faced a critical choice. The odds of success hovered at just 50%. Yet even if he failed, he'd only have to retrace the path he already knew so well. He'd mastered it once. Mastering it again would take no more time than he'd already spent. And so, with the morning light on his face, Ethan squared his shoulders and prepared to take the gamble. Chapter 458, Mastery Through Separation. Ethan had never been in doubt about how to grow stronger. His super-intelligent mind mapped out every step with crystal clarity. Even if he were stripped of his abilities, he knew he could reclaim them in short order. This wasn't arrogance. It was certainty born of understanding power at its core. To wield power instead of being wielded by it, he had to learn its nature, master its methods, and become its undisputed master. The first task was unambiguous: purge every competing energy from his body. With resolute purpose, Ethan set aside all concerns about Marvel or DC's influence. He reached deep within himself and summoned the might of the archangel power he had acquired from DC's pantheon. This celestial force was by far the strongest energy he carried, far greater even than the Infinity Stones. Channeling Archangel's power, he initiated a clean separation, systematically stripping the stone's energies from his essence. The moment Archangel's energy surged through him, Ethan's power skyrocketed. In an instant, he surpassed the strength of any single universe. And once he fully embraced his Archangel form, he knew he would stand as a multiverse-level force, untouchable by any foe. Ethan opened his eyes with sudden clarity. He'd already ranked the forces inside him. The might of his own Empire dimension was supreme. The Infinity Stones came next, and the combined power of Broly and Doomsday trailed behind. Yet none of that mattered now. What threatened to overwhelm him was DC's Archangel energy, rippling against the barriers of his mind. If he didn't purge these foreign powers, both Archangel's influence and even the gravitational pull of his own Empire force, he would never be free. He gathered every ounce of his will and prepared to act. He sank to the ground in a lotus position, closed his eyes, and turned his awareness inward. Already, alien energies had sprouted in his soul like invasive weeds, sapping his strength and threatening to choke him. He inhaled deeply, each breath a wordless vow: submit or be cast out. Then he let his consciousness drift through the labyrinth of his being, seeking out every bit of power that didn't belong. Almost immediately, the ordeal began. It felt as though flames licked at his bones, tearing his cells apart. His heart thundered so loudly he thought it might burst, each beat carrying a fresh wave of searing pain. He could almost feel iron grips crushing his lungs, turning every breath into a desperate struggle. Yet he refused to yield. Summoning the absolute authority of his own dimension, he fought to hold each alien force at bay. Minutes, or was it hours, passed in excruciating silence. Ethan pictured the unwanted energies as dark tendrils coiling around his core. He focused on severing their roots, launching a final surge of will against them. There was a silent, shattering rupture in his mind as each tendril snapped and dissolved into nothingness. Pain spiked to its apex, then abruptly vanished, leaving a profound emptiness in its wake. He opened his eyes and sat perfectly still, chest rising and falling in calm, unhurried breaths. The Infinity Stones, Broly's strength, Doomsday's ferocity, even DC Archangel's power, all had been purged. Only Ethan's pure, undiluted essence remained. He allowed himself the faintest of smiles. It was done. At last, he was truly master of his own fate. Ethan's eyes burned red, his vision swimming as though he were trapped in a sea of fire. Every fiber of his body felt like a battlefield, each cell locked in merciless combat. A raging force coursed through him, as if countless needles were driving into his flesh, yanking and twisting every nerve without mercy. The agony cut to his bones and threatened to shatter him outright. His muscles alternated between scorching tension and sudden, wrenching spasms, each wave of pain more excruciating than the last. His joints crackled under a force that seemed poised to snap them in two. With every heartbeat, His chest felt as if an invisible hammer struck him, pushing his heart toward escape. He struggled for breath. Each gasp of air sliced his lungs like a knife. Yet Ethan refused to surrender. Clenching his teeth against the torment, he summoned every ounce of willpower to withstand the onslaught. Sweat poured from him in torrents, mingling with tears born of pain. His clothes were drenched as they clung to him, but still he endured, determined not to let this agony break him. Ethan's body felt like a volcano on the verge of eruption, an inferno of agony and raw determination. Every nerve burned, yet with each pulse of pain, a surge of newfound power answered his silent plea. "You exist by my will. You are nothing but passing guests in this vessel." His heartbeat throbbed in time with the earth's deep rumble. His breath rode the howl of the wind. In that crucible of suffering, he began to forge an uneasy harmony with the forces writhing inside him. Pain tore at him like a relentless beast, as if trying to rend him limb from limb. Still, Ethan understood this trial was his only path to strength. He clenched his teeth, bracing himself against the onslaught. Sweat poured from him in torrents, drenching his tunic and stinging his skin with icy rivulets. His muscles convulsed, contracting and rebounding in a desperate attempt to channel every ounce of the power within. A guttural roar slipped from his throat, half agony, half defiance. Darkness crowded his vision, each wave of pain threatening to swallow him whole. Yet Ethan refused to yield. He gripped the fraying edges of his awareness and held fast to one unshakable belief: he would survive this. In that moment, time itself seemed to stall. His consciousness drifted, traveling the inner landscapes of his mind as he continued the silent dialogue with the ancient energies he'd awakened. And in the eye of his torment, he discovered the fragile, burgeoning equilibrium he'd been seeking. At last, the tide of pain reversed. Where fire had raged, a steady glow remained, testifying to the new power that now bowed only to him. Ethan knew he couldn't give up. He fought the darkness, struggling desperately to stay awake. Gradually, the searing pain began to subside. The alien power he'd been forced to host seemed to respond to his will, receding from his flesh in a slow, drizzling retreat, each moment mercifully gentle, yet each second still felt as sharp as a blade. He refused to yield. He gritted his teeth, clenching every muscle. When the final tendrils of that foreign energy slipped free, his body convulsed in one last violent shudder. Then, with agonizing slowness, Ethan pried open his eyes. He was utterly spent, as if he'd weathered a savage battle. His muscles ached under the weight of invisible blows. His fingers trembled so badly they shook on their own. But no fatigue could extinguish the fierce joy burning in his chest. In that moment of triumph, every tear and bead of sweat that fell to the ground felt like proof of his victory. Finally, drained of strength, Ethan collapsed. He lay there, limbs relaxed, the earth beneath him damp with his sweat and tears. Yet even as exhaustion claimed him, his eyes glittered with hard-won satisfaction. He had freed himself from the other power, and nothing could take that victory away. Ethan realized that he had succeeded in extracting the separate powers from within himself, his first step toward genuine strength. Before him, 8 luminous spheres coalesced in the air. The first 4 were the condensed essences of the Infinity Stones, the amethyst glow of the Power Stone, the ruby flash of the Reality Stone, the golden shimmer of the Mind Stone, and the azure pulse of the Space Stone, each forged from Ethan's own primal energy and untethered from the confines of the Marvel Universe. Next hovered the Archangel Orb, a pure sphere of white light capable of elevating its bearer to super-universe-level might. Beside it floated Broly's Orb, a twisted green sphere crackling with raw, untamed ferocity, followed by Doomsday's Orb, a deep crimson globe humming with apocalyptic menace. Finally, the iridescent T-globe of the Imperial Dimension orbited slowly, woven from Ethan's Lutheran Protoss concept and boundless energy. Without hesitation, he passed all 8 orbs to his wife, Keelan. Ethan had no interest in hoarding such vast powers. Any benefit he might siphon off would never truly help anyone, so it made far more sense to entrust them to her. Stationed in the Super Seminary universe, Keelan was perfectly positioned to master these energies and wield them on behalf of others. Chapter 459, Belated Power. Ethan stood in stunned silence, his mind spinning. He could scarcely believe how weak he felt. In the superunit universe, he'd been virtually unstoppable, but here and now, his strength had plummeted to a fraction of that glory. By anyone else's standards, he was still formidable, but to Ethan, the loss felt staggering. He flexed a hand, searching for any trace of his old might, but found nothing. "There's no particular change I can feel," he murmured, disappointment graying his thoughts. Then, as if responding to his doubt, a cascade of notifications blossomed in his consciousness, shimmering like digital text hovering before his inner eye. Each prompt detailed a new discovery by his superbrain, organized neatly into an upgrade log. Superpower acquired. Biological force field activated. Reinforced steel-like skin. Enhanced muscle density. Super strength. Accelerated reflexes and movement. Super speed. Every entry pulsed with energy. These weren't mere bullet points, but living transformations unfolding within him. Ethan's cells were being flooded by sunlight, absorbed, processed, and converted into raw power. He could literally feel himself growing stronger. Muscles he believed wasted and dormant were swelling, fibers knitting together with incredible force. It was like being famished for weeks, then devouring a feast that revitalized every ounce of his body. "Wow," he whispered. "So this is what it feels like." Each breath came easier, each heartbeat thrummed with newfound vigor. His skin tingled, steel-hard and impervious. A shimmering aura of biotic energy flickered at the edges of his silhouette. Ethan raised his arms experimentally, clenched his fists, and the ground beneath him trembled. He had doubted the potency of his rebirth. Now, there was no doubt at all. Every superpower he once wielded, super strength, super speed, a living force field, skin tougher than the hardest alloy, was back, reawakened and amplified. The late surge of power flooded him with confidence, banishing the last traces of uncertainty. Ethan let out a low laugh, part exhilaration, part relief. His journey had taken him through darkness and despair, but now, the dawn of his abilities shone brighter than ever. With a nod to the sky, he whispered, "Let's see what I can do." And with that, the world around him stirred, unaware that its strongest protector had just reclaimed the might to shape its fate. Ethan stared at the list scrolling across the display. Astral projection, telepathy, telekinesis, reality distortion, time manipulation, super strength, ultrasonic waves, pain transference, energy beams, teleportation, gigantism, mind control, super speed, clairvoyance, hypersonic flight, even time travel. His augmented brain had tweaked his own physiology to isolate each potential power, then run the numbers. The conclusion matched the suspicion he'd harbored all along. Could it really be true? "I actually limited myself?" he murmured. He leaned closer, eyes widening. The simulation lay out every cellular change since his birth, all computed with infinite precision by his superbrain. Under the rays of various suns, Ethan's Kryptonian heritage wouldn't simply grant strength and flight. It would trigger a full-blown evolutionary metamorphosis. Yet none of that had ever occurred, because he had deliberately held himself back. It was as if humanity hadn't reached an evolutionary dead end, but had instead been programmed to reject every unnecessary, or, in their eyes, unnatural mutation. That programming was Ethan's own doing. Craving predictability, he deployed an internal biological force field to filter and dilute incoming solar energy, suppressing the runaway evolution that his cells so eagerly craved. Now, seeing the truth laid bare, he realized just how far he'd restrained himself and how much power he really possessed. Ethan paused to consider the irony. Having fused with both Broly and Doomsday, he already wielded boundless energy and limitless physical strength. There was no need to absorb additional solar power for recovery. Yet, in refusing that power, he was inadvertently capping his own potential for evolution. From the moment he was born, this Kryptonian had learned to draw sunlight from countless universes, each sun granting a unique ability. True evolution, he knew, meant mastering those powers as one's own. Destined by his very nature to become a supreme being, Ethan's journey would stretch across time itself, if only he allowed it. He chuckled softly at himself. Of course he had been cautious at the outset. No one in their right mind would venture into uncharted territory without a clear plan or solid intelligence. Mistakes were inevitable in any enterprise, and he bore no regrets. Still, he resolved to tread more boldly in the future. After all, his nature, like his power, demanded it. Ethan felt the surge of power quake through him. Though it had ebbed slightly from its absolute peak, What remained still dwarfed almost anything he'd ever known. He now wielded energy on a scale rivaling an entire universe. This dizzying leap in strength had come from siphoning solar energy across multiple realities, a super evolution no slow growth enhancement could match. In effect, he was drawing on this universe's very lifeblood, and he still hadn't figured out what kind of cosmos could supply so much raw firepower. Beneath him, centuries of ice cracked and splintered, flooding the polar plain with meltwater. Emergency climate alarms screamed across every frequency, but the warnings washed over Ethan like distant thunder. His focus lay elsewhere. A crackling voice crackled in his earpiece. "General, they've arrived." He glanced up just as a swirl of light coalesced into a single figure. Standing at the center of a dozen armed soldiers was a striking woman in a pristine white military dress coat. Her hair was long, ice blue, and swept back from a perfectly composed face. At over 6 feet tall, she carried herself with both grace and iron resolve. Ethan's brow furrowed. Despite the uniform, despite the soldiers at her side, it was impossible to ignore how her gaze pierced straight to his core. "Who are you?" he demanded. The general's eyes narrowed, a faint, curious smile tugging at her lips. Her troops shifted uneasily, but she held them with just a quiet gesture. In that silent moment, both sides braced for the next move, one that might decide the fate of this world, and perhaps the multiverse beyond. Ethan watched as Esdeath's eyes widened in surprise, then softened into a curious, calculating look. Through their brief exchange, he'd observed every nuance telepathically. Only now did he fully grasp the world he'd been plunged into, the realm of Crimson Eyes. It was a place of savage beauty, breathtaking from horizon to horizon, but utterly merciless to ordinary mortals. He'd never expected to arrive here. Everywhere he looked, frost-kissed spires and blood-stained fields mingled in a haunting tableau, an impossible landscape, alive with magic and danger. Standing before him was General Esdeath herself, the Empire's fearsome Queen of Ice, and the very heroine Ethan had adored in his favorite series. Of all the women he'd ever encountered, real or fictional, none had captured him as she did. At best, all he felt for others like Hill was pity. Ethan recalled how the animated adaptation surpassed the manga in sheer brutality. In the comic, a handful of characters escaped death. Here, they were all mercilessly cut down. Yet those darker turns only enriched the story's grim power. Esdeath was the sort who raised anything she couldn't possess, and the anime's finale, harsh as it was, felt utterly true to her merciless nature. A few spin-offs boasted more intricate plots, but none matched this world's raw intensity. As he steadied himself, Ethan noted 2 crucial facts. Esdeath had not yet encountered Tasmi, and Najexitan, freshly defected from the Empire, was already pledging himself to the Revolutionary Army. The gears of fate were shifting, and in the world of Crimson Eyes, only the strongest or the most ruthless would endure. Ethan stood before Esdeath, his expression guarded as the Ice Queen studied him. "You're an Imperial weapon user, aren't you?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. "An Imperial weapon capable of instantaneous movement. Could you be the dimensional array Shangri-La?" There was nothing about Ethan that screamed enemy. He showed no signs of being a Northerner, an alien race Esdeath hunted without mercy. Yet for the sheer thrill of battle, she often spared a few prisoners. By doing so, she'd inadvertently woven herself into the court's delicate politics. The ministers and even the young emperor relied on her too heavily to dare oppose her. In the grand tapestry of threats, mythic creatures like the cross-tailed dragon and the dreaded ice phoenix, Esdeath ranked as the single greatest force. Part of the ice phoenix's blood pulsed through her veins, gifting her a power that eclipsed every other imperial weapon. Some whispered that her cruelty wasn't entirely her own, that the phoenix's savage will had tainted her mind. Still, those rumors only hinted at the truth. Even as a child, she'd taken pleasure in torturing dangerous beasts with her blade, watching them writhe in agony as a grim sort of entertainment. Now, standing before her, Ethan wondered which version of Esdeath he would meet. The ice-cold soldier loyal to the Empire, or the merciless predator who delighted in suffering. How could it be influenced by the Ice Phoenix? That's her true nature, Ethan said abruptly. Esdeath's lips curved into a contemptuous smile. You desire power, General? She asked, her voice as cold as frost. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. Yes, I seek strength. A harsh, echoing laugh escaped Esdeath's throat. At her side, one of the officers snapped to attention. General Esdeath, allow me. I will be the one to take him down. With the three beastmen nowhere in sight, the officer drew his sword and advanced on Ethan. Chapter 460, Esdeath's Thirst for Power. Esdeath raised her hand to halt her soldiers, only to find her target gone. Not gradually, but in an instant, with a sharp pop. A cold thrill ran down her spine. She and her troops now realized they faced a truly formidable foe. She hadn't even seen how Ethan vanished. What kind of Tegu granted such an ability? She'd never heard of anything like it. Ethan, for his part, studied Esdeath with mild amusement. He had no pressing business here. After all, he still planned to hop over to the world of One Punch Man and several others to soak up the sun and make up for every missed super evolution. A brief detour was the least he could afford himself. Esdeath's lips curved into a confident smile. Fear was a foreign notion to her. No matter how powerful an opponent might be, she would never back down. If this enigmatic stranger could slay her, so be it, she would respect him all the more. With a swift gesture, she lashed out a storm of ice spikes. Yet each missile dissolved before it reached Ethan, vanishing into thin air at a precise distance. Her keen mind raced. This wasn't merely an offensive trick, but a defensive safeguard. Fascinating, she whispered to herself. Let's see just how strong you really are. She bellowed her challenge, drawing her sword in a single fluid motion. In a flash, Esdeath swung her ice-forged blade, carving a path toward him, only to discover once again that Ethan had slipped away without a trace. Esdeath lunged forward, her sword slicing the air, only for the blade to vanish the instant it neared Ethan, disintegrating inch by inch before his eyes. Surprised, she shifted her weight, tightened her legs, and sprang upward in a single fluid motion. Hail Fury Leap Strike! With a sharp snap of her fingers, the frigid air behind her seized every bead of moisture around them and sculpted it into a colossal, frost-encrusted star, the Ice Hail Meteor. Hovering above the battlefield, it pulsed with raw, frozen power. Let's see if you can stop this. Esdeath never rushed blindly into combat with unknown forces, but she was determined to probe the limits of Ethan's strength. Summoning every ounce of her might, she vaulted onto the surface of that gigantic ice star and rode it skyward. Then, gathering speed, she drove her fist into the meteor's core, sending splintered shards of ice screaming outward like deadly projectiles. It was a horrifying display. Even the formidable brute force of the One Piece realm's fiercest creatures, let alone Diamond Jozu's diamond defenses, whose best boulder barely equaled a tenth of this frozen behemoth, paled in comparison. Yet as those jagged ice fragments hurtled toward him, Ethan stood unmoved. What would be a cataclysm for anyone else was for him nothing more than a chilling inconvenience. Ethan hardly moved. He remained rooted in place, head down, as his death unleashed a storm of colossal hailstones. The shards fell like meteors of ice, each one a miniature wrecking ball, turning the sky into a battlefield of frozen death. Yet as the blizzard marched toward him in a perfect, uninterrupted front, something astonishing happened. The hail vanished in midair, dissolving silently before it could touch the ground. Esdeath, suspended on a gust of frigid wind, watched in growing incredulity. When the last echo of ice shattered, she spiraled downward and landed hard on the frosty earth. Only then did she lift her gaze to Ethan, her eyes wide with disbelief. He had utterly nullified her signature assault, something she had never before seen thwarted so effortlessly. To Esdeath's knowledge, this very technique had once demolished an entire army of 100,000 soldiers as though they were grains of sand. It was an attack on par with a natural cataclysm, the kind she reserved for her most desperate moments. And it was powered by her Mahabatano, Great Frost Blossom, a devastating ability capable of freezing time itself, wieldable only once per day. Even more, Esdeath commanded General Bingland's unending blizzard, a sweeping freeze that stretched across the Empire's borders and would never abate so long as Esdeath lived. From that storm, ice legions, knights, foot soldiers, even autonomous sentries rose without pause, each one an extension of her will. And yet here was Ethan, a lone figure, standing unmoved in the heart of her greatest power, having dispelled it as though swatting aside a handful of snow. Silence fell over the battlefield. The howling wind stilled. Even the distant crack of shattered ice seemed to pause, as both warrior and general stared at the young man who had just challenged, perhaps even surpassed, Esdeath's formidable might. Only two techniques could possibly counter Esdeath's Hail Fury leap attack. Even using her most powerful move, she still hadn't managed to glean anything more about Ethan, so she resolved to finish this duel on her own. "White ice breaking blow," she commanded, pressing her palms together and snapping them apart. Instantly, hundreds of colossal ice spikes, each larger than a fully grown soldier, sprang from the ground and hurtled straight for Ethan. He stood perfectly still, never even flinching. As each icy pillar closed in, it shattered harmlessly against an invisible barrier surrounding him. Esdeath's expression remained unreadable. She had anticipated his deflecting her assaults. Switching tactics, she lunged forward, closing the distance in an instant and unleashing a thunderous punch. Her fist cut through the air and vanished. The moment Esdeath's strike connected with Ethan's defense, her arm simply ceased to exist. Pain flared through Esdeath, but she didn't cry out. She knew now, without a doubt, that Ethan was on a completely different level. She forced herself to stand tall, ignoring the agony. "General Esdeath!" her troops cried out, rushing toward her as soon as they saw she'd lost an arm. "Stand down," Esdeath ordered, her voice cold and steady. She wouldn't allow anyone to interfere. Not yet. Ethan winced as he stared at his shattered arm. "I thought you'd show me mercy," he said through gritted teeth. Esdeath offered him a cold, almost amused smile. "You're not mine yet," she replied. "Why would I?" He couldn't help a short, bitter laugh. "True enough." She inclined her head, her dark eyes unreadable. From the moment they first crossed blades, she'd insisted on close-quarters combat, believing that Ethan had seen her raw hunger for power and would value that above all else. Her plan was simple: draw him in, prove her worth, then seize the moment to turn the tide in her favor. But his calm reaction shattered her assumptions. He cared neither for her survival nor her defeat. In his world, life and death were nothing more than pieces on a board, arranged and discarded by strength alone. Esdeath believed in that brutal law of the jungle: only the strong prey upon the weak. She would willingly submit to someone more powerful, but submission was not surrender. She knew that now her only choices were to die on her feet or to climb higher than ever before. Ethan had warned her of this earlier. He didn't seek her death so much as her unwavering resolve. He wouldn't accept surrender. Clenching her jaw, Esdeath straightened her shoulders. She would survive this trial. She would become stronger, and she would claim her place among the mightiest of all. After Akahime and the others finally overpowered Esdeath, she refused to yield. Stubborn to the last breath, she'd rather die than bend, and if beaten, she'd only admit she wasn't strong enough, never that the victory was unfair. That unbending pride was exactly what Ethan needed to exploit. He understood that Esdeath craved power above all else. Standing before her, Ethan offered a gentle smile. "You've bent the knee to emperors and ministers far weaker than yourself. Why not submit to someone stronger?" Esdeath froze. Pride warred with relief in her eyes. Then she dropped to one knee. "I submit to you, my new master," she declared, her voice steady. "Excellent," Ethan replied. The moment the words left his lips, Esdeath felt a mad, eating itch along her broken arm, an itch so intense she almost cried out. She stared at her limb in astonishment. Where there had been jagged fractures and splintered bone, the injuries were knitting themselves back together, as though they'd never existed.